Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a nice idea if everyone can leave a comment and let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. I never imagined something like this would happen to me. I always thought I was careful, too careful, even. I lived alone in a small apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I liked it quiet, liked the solitude. I'd been living there for about 2 years when it all started. It was subtle at first, so small I brushed it off, not realizing what was really happening until it was too late. It began with the packages. I came home from work one evening to find a small, unmarked box sitting on my doorstep. It was nothing special, just a plain cardboard box, no logo or anything, and the return address was blank. I figured it was a mistake or maybe one of those subscription services that I had forgotten about signing up for. I had recently ordered a few things online, so it didn't seem out of place. I brought it inside and opened it. Inside was a silver bracelet, simple, but beautiful. I didn't remember ordering it, but I thought maybe I had bought it when I was half asleep, or maybe it was a gift. I don't know why, but it didn't feel completely wrong. But at the same time, it felt like something was off. I tried to convince myself it was no big deal, that I must have forgotten. Over the next few days, the boxes kept coming. They were all different sizes, and each contained something new: a scarf, a pair of earrings, a small leather wallet, a notebook, even a framed picture of a house I'd never seen before. Each package had no return address, no note, and no explanation. They all looked like they'd been bought online. And every single item felt too personal. I didn't know who would have bought these things for me. I don't wear jewelry often, and I definitely hadn't been shopping for scarves. The things in the boxes didn't fit any theme, just random items. But there was one thing that struck me as strange: they were all things I could have imagined buying for myself. They were almost too close to my taste. It felt like someone was watching me, picking up things that they knew I would like. I started to feel uneasy, and I'm not one to get scared easily. I'm pretty independent, confident even. But this wasn't right. I tried to ignore it, hoping it was just a mix-up, but then I started receiving them more frequently. Every few days. They began piling up in my living room, and I couldn't stand it anymore. One day, I received a package that made my blood run cold. It was a small box, like the others, but this one was different. I opened it, and inside was a receipt. At first, I thought maybe it was just something that had slipped in by accident. But when I looked closer, my stomach twisted. The receipt had my address on it, my full name, my apartment number. But there was something else. The receipt listed a purchase, but not something I'd ordered. It was for the very bracelet that had shown up a few days earlier, the one I had found in the first package. My mind raced as I read the rest of the receipt. It was addressed to someone else. I couldn't make sense of it. Who had sent it? I'd never ordered anything from that store, let alone from someone else's address. And yet, there it was, clear as day. The purchase had been made online, with my address listed as the shipping address. But it wasn't my name on the receipt. It was someone else's name. I checked the name carefully, rereading it over and over. I didn't recognize it. The address it had been sent from wasn't familiar either, but it didn't make any sense. How could something from a completely different address end up at mine? I didn't know anyone who lived there. I felt sick, dizzy. Who was doing this? Why? Why me? I decided to do something about it. I called the police, but when they came, they didn't seem all that concerned. The officer who showed up was kind, but he didn't take me seriously. He said it could just be a mistake, maybe a shipping error or something harmless. He suggested I take it up with the company that had sent the items, but when I tried to find their contact information, there was nothing. The company didn't exist, at least not in any way I could trace. I told the officer about the strange receipt, but he just shrugged. "There's nothing illegal here, ma'am," he said, clearly trying to reassure me. "If you're feeling unsafe, just lock your doors and keep an eye on your security cameras." I wasn't satisfied. I felt like I was losing my mind. I started double-checking every package, inspecting them for anything I could find. Each one was more troubling than the last. The items kept coming: scarves, books, toys, all kinds of things. And still no note, no explanation. It became clear that whoever was doing this was watching me. They knew my address, my habits, the things I liked. But they were not just sending random items. They were sending things that were so specific to me that it felt like they had been in my life for a while. One evening, I decided to go to the address listed on the receipt. Maybe I'd get some answers, or at least figure out who was behind it. I couldn't just keep living like this, feeling like I was being stalked. The house wasn't far from mine. It was in a quieter neighborhood, tucked away behind some trees. I stood outside for a while, my heart racing. The house looked empty. It was an old two-story with a cracked porch and a rusted mailbox. The grass hadn't been mowed in a while. There were no lights on inside. It felt abandoned, yet there was something about it that gave me a bad feeling, like someone had just stepped out. I didn't want to go inside, but I knew I had to. I took a deep breath and walked up to the door. There was no answer when I knocked. I rang the bell. Nothing. I tried to peer through the windows, but the curtains were drawn. It felt wrong. It felt like someone was inside, but they were deliberately hiding. Then, I saw movement. Just a shadow flickering through the curtain. My heart stopped. I knocked again, harder this time. Still, no one came. I felt a knot in my stomach, and a wave of dread washed over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me through those curtains. I backed away from the door, but before I could turn and leave, I heard something, the creak of the door opening behind me. I spun around. There was an older woman standing on the doorstep. She was dressed in a faded robe, her hair messy and wild. Her eyes were wide, and she looked at me with a kind of vacant curiosity. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft but distant. I was about to speak when I realized that I didn't know what to say. Who was she? What was she doing here? I didn't know if I should ask her about the receipts or about the strange items. But something about the way she stood there made me pause. "Are you?" I started, but my words got caught in my throat. I didn't want to accuse her of anything, but I knew something was wrong. "I'm sorry," she said, almost apologetically. "I think you've got the wrong house." I looked at her for a long moment. Her face was unreadable, like she was hiding something. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "No, I've seen your address on a receipt," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "It was from this address. Why are you sending things to my house?" She stared at me for a long time, then sighed and stepped back. "You need to leave," she said softly, almost too softly. "You don't know what you're getting into." Before I could say another word, she shut the door in my face. I didn't know what to do after that. I left, my mind spinning. I never went back to that house. But after that, the packages stopped. It was like the person, whoever they were, just gave up. I've never had any real answers, and I'm still not sure what exactly happened. But I know this, I'm more careful now. I lock my doors at night. I'm always on edge. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear that woman's voice echoing in my mind. You don't know what you're getting into. I don't even know where to begin with this. I'm still trying to process it, even though it happened weeks ago. I guess writing it out is the only way I can make sense of what happened. If anyone reading this has ever had something similar happen, I'd really appreciate hearing your thoughts. Maybe I'm overreacting, but everything about this situation still feels off. So, I'll start at the beginning. I had been working long hours at my job, managing a small coffee shop in the downtown area. The hours were grueling, and honestly, I'd been looking forward to coming home, kicking back, and just getting some rest. My apartment isn't huge, but it's perfect for me. I've lived there for about 2 years. I've always felt safe there, nothing ever felt out of place. When I pulled into the parking lot, it was already getting dark. It was a weekday, so the lot wasn't crowded. I grabbed my things from the car and walked to the building. As I approached the entrance, I noticed something was a little off. The door to the building, which is usually unlocked and easy to get into, was closed but locked. I didn't think much of it at first, since the building isn't the most secure and sometimes maintenance has to lock the door to keep it from being a free-for-all. I fumbled around in my bag, looking for my keys, and that's when I realized something. My keys weren't there. I checked all the usual spots of my purse, my jacket pockets, but nothing. At first, I thought maybe I left them at work or at a friend's place. So, I figured I'd deal with it after I went upstairs. I knocked on the building manager's door. No one answered. I thought he might have just stepped out, so I tried the landlord's number. I had it saved in my phone just in case of emergencies like this. When he picked up, I told him the situation. "Hi, Mr. Thompson, it's Claire. I'm locked out of the building. The door's locked, and I can't get in. I think I've misplaced my keys." There was a pause on the other end, then he replied, "That's odd. I didn't lock the door. Are you sure you didn't just forget your keys inside?" "I checked everywhere," I said, already feeling frustrated. "I'm sure I've just misplaced them, but can you open the door?" He hesitated for a second. "I can't really do that right now. The building's locked up for the night. I'll come by first thing in the morning to check." "You'll have to wait until then." I was annoyed. "You're telling me there's no way to get in?" "I don't have a spare key on me." "What should I do?" "I just want to get inside and relax." Mr. Thompson's voice grew a little tighter. "You'll just have to wait until I come by tomorrow, Claire. I'm sorry for the inconvenience." That was that. No help, no solutions. So, I decided to wait outside until I figured something out. I didn't want to cause any more of a scene, so I sat on the steps, texting some friends about my frustration. I tried to keep my mind busy as the minutes dragged on. At that point, I just wanted to go to bed. After a while, I decided to try something. I pulled out my phone again and opened the building's security app, one that lets residents check the cameras in the hallway. I don't use it often, but I thought maybe it would show if anyone was around, maybe if Mr. Thompson had been in the building recently. To my surprise, I saw something strange. The hallway camera showed no one at the entrance, but what caught my eye was the timestamp. It was from today, several hours before. There was footage of me entering the building after work, just as I'd done most days. But what didn't make sense was the next part. After I went inside, the timestamp switched, showing someone else coming in, not me. I stared at my phone in disbelief. The figure was blurry but looked tall, with dark clothes. I couldn't make out much more than that, but it didn't make sense. The door had been locked when I got there. Who was that person? I felt a sick feeling in my stomach as I ran through possible explanations. Could someone else have come into the building earlier in the day? Or had the footage been tampered with? My heart began to race. I called Mr. Thompson again. This time, he answered on the second ring. Mr. Thompson, I need you to check something for me. There's someone else in the building, someone who came in after me. The cameras show them walking around, and I need to know who it is. He paused again. I don't know what you're talking about, Claire. There's nobody in the building right now. I told him about the footage. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before he spoke again. I'll be over there shortly. Don't go inside yet. We need to figure this out. I waited for what felt like an eternity, watching the building from across the street, too anxious to sit still. I kept thinking, maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the camera malfunctioned. But then, why hadn't anyone been around when I checked earlier? Why hadn't the building been open? My mind raced with questions, none of them making sense. When Mr. Thompson finally arrived, I let him in through the back door. He seemed uncomfortable, like he didn't want to be there, and that only made my nerves worse. We made our way upstairs. The hallways were empty, eerily quiet. I didn't know what to expect. I unlocked my apartment door with a spare key Mr. Thompson handed me. As soon as the door opened, something felt off. I couldn't explain it, but there was a shift in the air. The apartment looked the same, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. I stepped inside slowly, and Mr. Thompson followed behind me. Everything seems fine, I said, but I couldn't shake the unease settling in my chest. I scanned the room. Then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The window in the living room was slightly open. Not enough to have been left that way by accident, but enough for someone to have slipped through. I walked over and shut it, but then I froze. Something was wrong. There was a cup on the kitchen counter, half full with water, and a blanket draped over the couch. None of it was mine. Mr. Thompson, I whispered, my voice shaky. Someone's been here. Someone's been living here. These aren't my things. He stepped in, his face draining of color as he started looking around, his eyes wide. I'll have to check the rest of the apartment, he muttered, almost to himself. We went through every room. As we entered the bedroom, I saw it, something that made my stomach churn. There, in the corner of the room, was a duffel bag. I didn't recognize it. It wasn't mine. When I opened it, it was filled with clothes, food wrappers, and a stack of books. All of them were items I didn't own. There were even a few photos, too. Photos of me taken from different angles, like someone had been watching me. I felt my knees weaken. Mr. Thompson, what is this? He didn't answer. His face was pale, his hands shaking as he moved away from the bag. I don't know. We stood there for what felt like forever. My mind was racing, my thoughts swirling. Someone had been living in my apartment, watching me. They knew my routine. I'd been so careful, so unaware. I didn't know what to think anymore. Eventually, the police were called. They found a few more things that didn't belong to me, clothes, toiletries, even food in the fridge. But after a few hours of investigation, the person who'd been living there was never found. They left nothing but those items behind. I still don't know who was in my apartment. I don't know how they got in, or how long they had been there. The landlord couldn't explain it, and the police couldn't either. I moved out a few weeks later. I couldn't stay there anymore, not with the thought that someone had been watching me, living in my space without me knowing. Now, every time I come home, I double-check the locks, the windows, and the doors. But the worst part is every now and then, I'll wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I hear something. Footsteps. Movement. And for a split second, I wonder if they're back. I don't know why I didn't think to just take the stairs that day. It's not like I had a good feeling about the elevator, but I was tired, and the thought of climbing up all those flights just didn't sit well with me. Looking back, I wish I had. I had been working late at the office, trying to get some reports finished before the deadline. It was a long day, and by the time I was ready to leave, the building was quiet. It was almost 9 p.m., and everyone else had already gone home. The lights in the hallways flickered slightly, and the hum of the air conditioning was louder than usual. The only sound that broke the stillness was the distant clacking of my shoes as I walked towards the elevator. The building was mostly empty by that time of night, but I didn't mind. I was used to the loneliness that came with working late. It's always the same routine. I punch in the code, wait for the elevator to arrive, and then I ride it down to the parking garage. That night, everything seemed normal. I pressed the button for the elevator and waited. It took a little longer than usual for it to arrive, which wasn't surprising considering it was late. The door finally opened, and I stepped in. The elevator was small, just big enough for me and a couple other people. It was clean, old, but functional. The ride down to the ground floor usually wasn't a big deal, but for some reason, I felt uneasy as the doors slid shut behind me. The elevator started moving. It wasn't particularly fast, but it was smooth. The button for the first floor was already lit up, and I stood there, staring at my reflection in the steel walls, waiting for the descent. I was distracted for a few seconds when I heard a faint click as if the elevator had stopped on a floor. But that was odd because I didn't remember the elevator stopping before the ground floor. When I looked up, the light above the 13th floor button was on. Now, I know some buildings skip the 13th floor due to superstition or other reasons, so I just figured the elevator had taken a weird detour. Maybe it was malfunctioning, I thought, but I wasn't overly concerned. I just assumed it would start moving again, but instead, it stopped completely. The lights above each floor button blinked as if something wasn't right, but the elevator didn't budge. I was about to press the button to go back down when the elevator doors opened with a soft ding. I froze. No one was supposed to be there at this time of night, especially not on the 13th floor. The 13th floor was empty. It had been empty for as long as I could remember. I hadn't seen a soul up there in months. It was practically off limits, with maintenance workers occasionally doing something up there, but even they always worked on weekdays. I'd heard rumors of strange things happening up there, noises, lights flickering, but I never gave it much thought. Still, I was confused. I stood there, staring into the hallway. No one was visible, but the door was open, and the floor was lit. It was unsettling. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't want to panic. So, I just stood there, waiting, trying to convince myself there was nothing to worry about. Then, I saw a figure. A man was walking down the hall toward the elevator. He was dressed casually, nothing out of the ordinary, just a regular-looking guy in a dark jacket and jeans. He didn't look like he belonged there, though. I didn't recognize him, and I was sure I would have remembered seeing him at the building before. He didn't even acknowledge me when he stepped inside the elevator. He just nodded slightly, pressed the button for the basement, and stood there, facing forward. Now, at this point, I was already feeling off. I didn't like the way things were unfolding. The elevator shouldn't have stopped on the 13th floor, and there shouldn't have been anyone there at all. But now, I was trapped in this small space with a stranger who didn't seem to care about what had just happened. The elevator started moving again, and I glanced at the stranger. He seemed calm, almost too calm. His face was expressionless, but there was something in the way he stood there, as if he was waiting for something. His eyes flicked toward the buttons, and I noticed his finger hovered over the basement button for a moment. My stomach turned. The basement? That's where the maintenance staff kept all their equipment, and the garage entrance was there too. It wasn't a place anyone typically went unless they had a reason. But it was late. Late enough that no one should have been there. As the elevator descended, the air grew thicker. The hum of the machinery got louder, and the lights flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't find the words. Something about this situation felt wrong. When we reached the basement, the elevator slowed and came to a complete stop. The doors didn't open. There was no sound. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. The stranger didn't seem worried. He just stood there, still. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to break the silence. He didn't answer. He just pressed his finger to the door's open button. The doors didn't open. I could feel the tension in the air. Something wasn't right. I could sense it. The man beside me was completely still, not moving, not saying anything. I felt a strange urge to look at the button for the 13th floor, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I glanced at the emergency phone next to the control panel, but I didn't dare touch it. Then, the man did something that made my heart skip. He turned to me, his face still neutral, but his eyes were focused, too focused. "You need to get out," he said quietly. I swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" He didn't respond at first, but the way he looked at me made my skin crawl. He reached for the button again, as if testing it. The elevator was still stuck, and I had no idea what was going on. "I need to get out," he said again, his tone darker this time. That's when I felt it. The door should have opened by now. But the air was heavy, and I couldn't tell if it was just nerves or something else, something I couldn't see. I backed away from the man slowly, my mind racing. Should I try the emergency phone? Should I press the button again? Or should I get off on the basement floor and run? I couldn't decide. The man turned suddenly, and I instinctively moved back toward the door. "Get out of the elevator," he snapped, his voice low and commanding. I froze. His demeanor had changed in an instant. He was no longer the calm, collected person from earlier. He was intense, and his voice carried a force that made my heart race. I felt trapped. I couldn't stay in this small space with him any longer. I reached for the emergency phone, but just as I touched it, the elevator jolted. It moved again, but this time it moved up. It was moving faster than I'd ever felt before, and the lights flickered wildly. I felt a rush of panic rise in my throat. I wasn't sure where it was going, but I didn't care. I pressed the button to stop it. I kept hitting it until the elevator finally came to a halt. The doors opened, and I bolted out into the hallway. My legs were shaky, but I didn't look back. I didn't know where the man went or what happened to him, but I wasn't about to stick around and find out. I ran all the way down to the lobby, my mind spinning. I could hear my breath in my chest, but I didn't stop. The elevator never came down. I didn't see the stranger again. I don't know where he went. To this day, I can't explain what happened. The building's security didn't pick up anything unusual on the cameras, and there was no sign of the man anywhere. But I know what I felt. I know what happened in that elevator. I can still hear the soft hum of the machinery when I close my eyes, and I wonder if I'll ever feel safe in a building like that again. I'll never forget that evening. I don't know why I went out for a walk when it was getting dark. Maybe it was just one of those days, you know? A quiet walk seemed like a good way to clear my head. I live near a park, and the weather was perfect for it. Not too hot, not too cold, with a slight breeze. The kind of evening you'd want to spend outside before the sun fully set. I had walked this route countless times before, just a short loop around the park. It was peaceful. The park was usually pretty empty around dusk, which was why I liked going then. It wasn't too crowded, and I could enjoy the sound of birds or the wind through the trees without being disturbed. That day, I'd gotten off work early, so I decided to take a stroll. My mind was full of work and other things, but I didn't really notice how quickly the park started getting quieter as the sun dipped lower. The park is well lit, but it's the kind of place where, if you're walking alone, it can feel a little isolating once the sun goes down. Still, I didn't feel anything odd at first. There was no one else around, except for one man. He was just ahead of me, walking at a comfortable pace, but I noticed that every time I took a turn along the path, he seemed to adjust his pace, too. It wasn't something that struck me as strange at first. I figured he was just walking the same route I was. But then it became a little too obvious. I would take a right at the next bend, and he would follow. The path I was walking on is a simple, winding route through the park, nothing complicated. You go one way for a while, then turn left or right to loop back around. He wasn't walking particularly fast, but he was always there, just a few steps behind me. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. I mean, people walk the same paths all the time, right? There was no reason for me to think it was anything out of the ordinary. But then, when I decided to change direction just to mix things up and see if I could get ahead of him, I noticed he did the same thing. I changed direction, and he did, too. I turned left instead of right, and sure enough, he followed. A part of me started feeling uneasy, but again, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. He could have just been taking the same walk, right? But then it happened again. I was walking faster now, just trying to get to a part of the park that had more people, hoping the man would lose interest and turn off to another path. But no, he stayed right behind me, never too far back, but close enough that I could hear the sound of his shoes crunching on the gravel, just faintly. When I glanced over my shoulder, I could see him, walking just a few steps behind, but not too close. He was dressed in dark clothing, a jacket and pants, nothing that stood out. He didn't look out of place. There was nothing particularly threatening about his appearance. But something about the way he moved, the way he kept following, made my skin crawl. I tried to pick up my pace again, thinking that maybe I could just make it to the exit without causing a scene. But I could hear his footsteps match my speed. I glanced over my shoulder again and saw that he was still there, his eyes locked on me, but there was no change in his expression. It was like he was just walking, like it was nothing. But I knew something was off. I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't want to panic. But I started feeling my chest tighten, like the air around me had become thicker, suffocating. I was nearly halfway through the park now, and the thought of running into the woods, away from the paths, didn't seem like a great idea. I could hear people further off, but not close enough for them to notice me. I was too far out for help to arrive in time if anything went wrong. I decided to do something bold. I wasn't about to let this guy keep following me without a reason. So, I made another sudden turn, this time heading toward the path near the playground. It's a place that usually has more people around. It wasn't as far from the main entrance, so there was a better chance someone might see me. But when I turned, he turned too. He didn't even hesitate. Now I was feeling that panic creeping up on me. I wasn't sure what I was dealing with, but something told me I needed to act quickly. I sped up again, walking as fast as I could without breaking into a full sprint. I didn't want to make it obvious that I was running, but I could hear his footsteps behind me, getting closer, just enough to keep me aware of his presence, but not enough that I could clearly tell if he was speeding up or just maintaining the same pace. It didn't matter. I had to get away. I kept telling myself to stay calm, to not make a scene. I wanted to stop and turn around, confront him, ask if he was lost or if he needed something. But something inside me told me that was a bad idea. I kept walking. I kept moving. Finally, I reached a busier part of the park where a few people were walking along the main road. I didn't stop to talk to them, but the fact that there were people around gave me a sense of relief. I slowed down just a little, trying to act casual, but the moment I did, the footsteps behind me slowed, too. I turned a corner and glanced over my shoulder, and for the first time, the man stopped walking. He didn't follow me any further. He just stood there, staring in my direction. I kept walking, trying not to look back. My heart was racing in my chest, and the more I thought about it, the more I felt like I had narrowly escaped something that I couldn't quite understand. I didn't know what that man had wanted, but I knew that he had been following me, and that was enough to make me feel like I was in real danger. I reached the exit and didn't stop walking until I was safely inside my car, driving away, heading straight for home. I didn't look back at the park. I didn't want to. I've never been back there in the evening after that night. Every time I think about it, I feel that knot in my stomach again. And I can't shake the feeling that he wasn't just out for a walk. He knew exactly what he was doing. It all started on a Tuesday afternoon, which sounds like a boring start to any story, but I promise it wasn't. I was sitting at my desk, scrolling through my emails, when I saw one from a company I'd applied to a few weeks earlier. I had nearly forgotten about them because I wasn't expecting to hear anything back. The subject line caught my attention: job interview invitation, company name, immediate availability required. I wasn't sure if it was spam at first, but I clicked it anyway. It was from someone named Mr. Thomas Coyle, and the email sounded legitimate enough, even though there was something a bit off about the tone. It was professional, but almost too professional. The email thanked me for applying and said they were impressed with my resume, which, to be honest, I was a little proud of. They asked me to come in for an interview the next day, at 10 a.m., at their office, which was conveniently located just a few blocks away from my apartment. They also mentioned something about an exclusive opportunity and requested I bring my ID for verification. The email was short and to the point, and they said they'd provide further details once I arrived. I was excited, of course, but also a little cautious. I'd heard stories about fake job offers and scams, so I wasn't completely naive. But this seemed like a real company. I'd done some research on them, and while they didn't have a huge online presence, there were a couple of credible references to them. So I decided to go. The next morning, I woke up early, put on my best interview outfit, and grabbed my resume. I wasn't nervous yet. In fact, I was kind of looking forward to it. A new job could be the fresh start I needed. I got to the address a little early, around 9:45 a.m. The building was on a quiet street, and it didn't look like much, definitely not the kind of place a prestigious company would operate out of. It was a small, old brick building with a faded sign on the front that said office suites available. There was no sign of the company name anywhere. I checked the email again to make sure I had the right place. The address matched exactly. I walked into the building, expecting a receptionist or maybe a lobby area, but instead, it was eerily quiet. The lights were dim, and there was nobody around. The floors looked like they hadn't been cleaned in a while, and I could hear the faint buzz of a broken light overhead. No one in sight. I felt a little unsettled, but I reminded myself that it was still early, and maybe the place just hadn't gotten busy yet. I checked the email again, and it mentioned a suite number, so I headed toward the hallway. The hallway seemed to stretch on longer than it should have for such a small building, and there were several closed doors, none of which had labels on them. The air smelled musty, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, but I pushed through it. Maybe it was just an old building. I walked to the end of the hall and saw a door labeled Suite 3. I knocked lightly before opening it, unsure if I should knock at all, but it felt more polite than just walking in unannounced. When I pushed the door open, there was a man standing behind a small desk. He was in his mid-40s, wearing a sharp suit, but his tie was slightly crooked. He looked up from a pile of paperwork and smiled when he saw me. "You must be my name," he said, standing up and extending his hand. "I'm Mr. Coyle. Welcome." I shook his hand, feeling a bit of relief that he at least looked normal, even if the setting felt off. "Thank you for meeting with me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course." "I'm glad you could make it," Mr. Coyle said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Please, have a seat. We'll get started right away." I sat down, my heart beating a little faster now. I was trying to keep calm, but the strange atmosphere of the place was starting to get to me. The room was small, with no windows, and the only light came from an old, buzzing fluorescent bulb overhead. The desk was cluttered with papers, but there was no computer or anything you'd expect in an office. Just papers. And an old filing cabinet that looked like it belonged in a basement. "So," Mr. Coyle began, sitting down opposite me, "let's dive right into it. We're very selective about the candidates we choose, as you can imagine. I'm sure you understand the importance of confidentiality in this field." I nodded, though I had no idea what field he was referring to. He didn't mention the company or what it actually did. It was starting to feel more like a weird interrogation than an interview. "I'll just ask you a few questions, and we can go from there," he continued, his tone suddenly more serious. "First, can you tell me a bit about yourself? What makes you a good fit for our company?" I went through the usual spiel, talking about my experience, skills, and why I thought I'd be a good match. Mr. Coyle seemed satisfied, nodding occasionally, but his expression was hard to read. His eyes were fixed on me, but it felt like he was looking through me, not at me. Then he asked something strange. "Do you have any family? My name?" His voice was almost too casual for the question. "Ah, yes. I have a brother and a sister, both older," I replied, not sure where this was going. "Interesting," he said, scribbling something down on a notepad. "And have you ever had any personal issues with them?" The question threw me off. I didn't want to get into family drama with someone I just met, especially not in a job interview. "No," I said, trying to keep my tone even. "Everything's fine with my family." He didn't respond. He just continued writing things down on his notepad, his eyes still not meeting mine. It was starting to feel uncomfortable. His questions were becoming increasingly personal, and I started to feel like I was being probed. The whole thing felt like it was crossing a line. Suddenly, he looked up, locking eyes with me for the first time. "I need you to answer honestly. My name," he said, his voice low and controlled. "You do want this job, don't you?" The way he asked it sent a chill down my spine. I hesitated for a moment, unsure how to answer. "Yes," I said slowly. I do, but I don't really understand what this job entails. Mr. Coyle smiled again, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was cold, almost predatory. You'll understand soon enough. For now, I just need to know if you're willing to trust me, he said, his voice slipping into something almost menacing. We only want the best here. And trust is essential. Before I could respond, he stood up abruptly and walked to the back of the room, unlocking a small, wooden door I hadn't noticed before. We'll move to the next phase now, he said, turning to look at me. It's just through here. My blood ran cold. I didn't know what the next phase was, but I had a sinking feeling that I wasn't supposed to be there. I stood up quickly, backing away from the desk. I'm sorry, but I don't think I can continue with this. Mr. Coyle's smile disappeared instantly. His eyes narrowed, and the air in the room felt heavy. You don't want to walk out of here. Not unless you really want to regret it. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. For a split second, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. But then something inside me snapped. I turned around and bolted for the door, not stopping to think, not caring if he chased me. My heart was pounding in my chest as I raced down the hallway, past the eerie, empty office spaces. I didn't stop until I was outside, breathing in the cold air of the street. I didn't look back. I don't know what would have happened if I stayed, but I'm certain that I made the right choice leaving when I did. That place didn't feel like a job interview. It felt like something much darker, something I didn't want to be a part of. I didn't get any follow-up emails, and I haven't heard from Mr. Coyle since. But every time I pass that building, I feel a chill crawl up my spine. I'm never going back there, not for any job. I didn't think much of it at first. It was late, probably around 11:30 at night, and I had just finished a long shift at work. I was tired, frustrated, and just ready to get home, shower, and crash. The street was quiet, as usual for this time of night. I lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where nothing much happens, and you feel safe knowing your neighbors are probably in bed by 9 p.m. But that night, as I was pulling into my driveway, something didn't feel right. I noticed him right away. There was a man standing near the edge of my driveway, just a few feet away from my car. He was standing still, just looking. At first, I thought maybe he was a neighbor or someone who had just taken a wrong turn, but that didn't make sense. No one else ever walked down our street this late. I slowed the car, then stopped completely. I figured I'd just give him a quick look to make sure he wasn't up to something weird. He seemed calm enough, but the way he was standing facing me, motionless, was odd. He didn't seem to have any real purpose, just standing there, like he was waiting for something. Or someone. I parked the car and grabbed my keys, planning to head inside quickly. As I opened the door to step out, I looked at him again, and that's when he noticed me. He quickly turned his head, making brief eye contact. It wasn't a long stare, just enough to make me feel uneasy. There was something in his eyes, something that made my gut twist, but I couldn't place it. It wasn't like he was looking at me like a neighbor or someone I knew. It felt different. I was just about to ignore him and go inside, but he took a step toward me, as if he wanted to talk. "Hey, sorry," he said, his voice a little too calm for how late it was. "I'm just looking for a friend. They don't live here, do they?" His words caught me off guard. I didn't recognize him at all. He was tall, maybe in his mid-30s, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. His appearance was average, nothing that stood out in a crowd, but his presence, it was like he didn't belong. He was too still, too quiet for someone who was looking for a friend. I shook my head, trying to hide my unease. No, sorry, don't know anyone by that name. I gave him a polite but firm nod, hoping that'd be enough to end the conversation. He seemed to pause for a second, looking at me with that same unsettling expression. Then he just nodded. Okay, thanks. Sorry to bother you. He turned and started to walk off down the street. I stood there for a moment, watching him walk away. Something about the way he moved, like he was calculating each step, made me feel a little more on edge. But again, it was late, I was tired, and I just wanted to go inside. I locked the car and hurried up the driveway to my front door. As I was unlocking it, I glanced back at the street one more time. The man had disappeared into the shadows, gone without a trace. I figured he had probably just taken a wrong turn or was out for a late-night walk. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next day, I didn't think much more of it. I got up, went to work, and got busy with the usual routine. But when I came home that evening, something caught my eye. My neighbor, who lived 2 houses down, was outside talking to a couple of police officers. It was weird because she was usually a quiet person, didn't have a lot of visitors, and certainly didn't seem like someone who'd be involved in anything with the police. I walked over, curious but not sure if I should intrude. The officers were asking her if she'd seen anything unusual around the neighborhood in the past week, and she was shaking her head, saying she hadn't. Everything okay? I asked, trying to sound casual. The officer looked at me, his expression serious. Are you familiar with a man who's been walking around the area at night? He asked. Tall guy, maybe late 30s, dark jacket. My stomach dropped. It was him. The man from the night before. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I saw him last night. He was standing near my driveway. The officer gave me a grim look. We've been getting reports of someone walking around, casing homes. Nothing concrete yet, but we're trying to track down more information. This guy's been acting suspiciously. We think he's been looking for a place to break into. I froze for a moment, not quite believing what I was hearing. A burglar? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You think he's been scouting houses? The officer nodded. That's what it looks like. We've had a couple of reports about similar behavior in this area over the last week. He's been going up and down the streets, talking to people, looking for places that seem empty. He's been getting bold, too. We're doing what we can to figure out who he is. My heart started pounding as I thought about the man standing in my driveway, about the way he'd looked at me. It all started to click. His strange, almost deliberate behavior. The way he approached me, asking about a friend that wasn't there. He wasn't looking for a friend at all. He was checking me out, seeing if I lived alone, seeing if my house was a target. I realized then that I wasn't just some random person to him. I was part of whatever strange, unsettling plan he had. The police officer gave me a quick rundown of what to do if I saw him again. Stay inside. Call them immediately. Don't approach him. They promised they'd keep an eye on the neighborhood, but it felt like it was too late. I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been watching me, waiting for the right moment. Over the next few days, I stayed extra alert. Every creak in the floorboards, every noise outside made my heart race. I found myself checking the locks on my doors multiple times a day, making sure the windows were shut tight before I went to bed. But the worst part was knowing that someone had been out there, in my neighborhood, with the intent to break in. Someone had been watching, waiting for an opportunity. Then, about a week later, I got a call from the police. They found the man, and it turns out he had been a local criminal with a history of burglaries. He wasn't just looking for a friend. He'd been scouting homes in the area for a while, trying to find a place to break into. They arrested him after they caught him going through someone else's backyard late at night. They said he had a few burglary tools on him, and he was also wanted for questioning in other nearby neighborhoods. It felt like a relief to know he was caught, but I couldn't forget how close he had been to my own house. How close he had been to me. And every time I walk down that street now, I find myself looking over my shoulder, just in case. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't noticed him that night, or if I'd been a little slower to get inside. All I know is that sometimes, a brief moment of eye contact can make all the difference. I've been driving alone at night countless times before, but this one night, everything felt off. It was around 11:30 p.m., a little later than I usually drive, but nothing out of the ordinary. I was on a back road heading home from a late shift at work, the kind of road that's mostly empty, lined with trees and the occasional house far off in the distance. There was only one street light about every half mile, so it was mostly dark except for my headlights cutting through the fog. I don't know why, but something about that night felt wrong from the start. Maybe it was just the darkness, or the quietness. But every time I passed a turnoff or an old driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Then, out of nowhere, I saw the flashing lights behind me. I didn't panic immediately. I was going under the speed limit, and I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. So I pulled over without hesitation, rolling down my window to let in the cool night air. The car that pulled up behind me was unmarked, but I didn't think much of it at first. Some police vehicles are unmarked, right? It wasn't that strange. I've seen it in movies and TV shows. I figured maybe the officer wanted to give me a warning about driving too fast or something. The man who got out of the car was tall, maybe in his late 30s, wearing a dark blue uniform and what appeared to be a badge clipped to his belt. He walked up to my window slowly, and I noticed something strange right away. His movements were too stiff, like he was trying to appear official but was uncomfortable in the role. But that could have been my mind playing tricks on me. "Good evening, ma'am," he said, his voice low, but not gruff. He seemed polite, almost too polite. "I'm Officer Taylor with the Highway Patrol. Do you know why I pulled you over?" "No, I don't think so," I said, trying to keep calm. "I mean, it was just a routine stop, right?" He nodded, still standing too close to my window. I could smell cigarette smoke on his breath, which seemed odd for a police officer. "You were swerving a bit back there. Just wanted to make sure everything was okay. Can I see your license and registration?" I reached into my glove box, but then I hesitated. I don't know why. Something about his whole demeanor didn't sit right with me. I was already giving him the benefit of the doubt, but there was something unsettling about the way he was standing there, almost like he was waiting for something. I handed him my license, then opened my glove box to get the registration, but I had to dig around a little, and that's when I heard him speak again. "Everything all right? You need any help with that?" he asked. His tone was too soft for a cop. It felt like he was trying to be reassuring, but it made me feel even more uneasy. "No, I've got it," I replied, trying to sound confident as I finally found the registration. I handed it to him, but when I looked up, something about his face didn't match what he was saying. His eyes were too intense, almost like he was sizing me up. He didn't move right away. For a moment, he just stood there, holding my documents, his hand gripping them tightly. "You know, ma'am," he started, his voice a little more quiet now, "it's a good thing I pulled you over. This area is known for, well, dangerous situations. You should be careful." There are some unsavory people around here late at night. I wasn't sure if I should be comforted or scared. The way he said it, it didn't sound like a warning, more like a veiled threat. I didn't like the direction this conversation was taking, so I made a decision. I reached for my phone, casually, but my fingers were shaking. I opened my contacts and called the non-emergency police number. I didn't know if it was necessary, but something inside me told me that it was better to be safe than sorry. I didn't hang up when it started ringing. I pressed the phone to my ear, but I made sure I kept my voice low so the man wouldn't hear. "Hello, how can I help you?" A woman's voice came through the line. I immediately whispered, "I think I've been pulled over by someone who's not actually a police officer. I need help." I heard the woman's voice turn serious. "Where are you? What's happening?" I quickly told her the street name, and that I was in my car with a man who claimed to be a police officer, but something felt off. I described him briefly, trying to keep my voice steady. The woman on the phone didn't waste any time. "Listen to me carefully. Stay in your car. Do not leave the vehicle. Do not engage with him further. If you're alone, drive off immediately. Do you understand?" I was still holding my phone, trying to keep my breathing calm. But what if he's really... He's not. She cut me off. He's not a police officer. I can't say why I know this, but I need you to drive off right now. Keep your doors locked, and don't open the window any more than you already have. Do you understand? "Why, yes," I stammered, my heart racing now. "What do I do?" "Drive. Now." I barely had time to process what was happening before I heard the officer at my window again. "Everything all right, ma'am?" he asked, his voice sounding different now. I could hear the edge of frustration in his tone. He was leaning closer to my window, and I could see him looking around as if checking to see who was watching. Without saying anything else, I turned my ignition on, slammed the gear shift into drive, and peeled away from the side of the road as fast as I could. The man was yelling behind me, but I didn't look back. I was too focused on the road, my hands tight on the steering wheel. I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror, terrified he might be following, but I didn't see any headlights behind me. I didn't stop until I reached a well-lit intersection, and even then, I didn't feel safe. I pulled into a gas station and parked near the entrance, my heart still pounding in my chest. I called the police again, told them what happened, and gave them my location. They said they would send an officer out to check the area, but they made it clear that the man I had encountered was likely an imposter, and that I had done the right thing by driving off. It wasn't until much later, after I got home and calmed down, that I realized just how close I had come to being in a bad situation. The officer, the uniform, the badge, it had all seemed so real at the time. But if I hadn't called the real police, if I hadn't trusted my gut, I don't know what would have happened. The worst part? I never found out who that man was. There were no reports of anyone matching his description in the area, and they never found the car he had been driving. I don't know if he was targeting me specifically or just trying to find someone vulnerable, but it wasn't the kind of encounter I'd ever want to repeat. I haven't driven on that road at night since. And I still check my rearview mirror way more than I ever did before. I hope I never see him again. I moved into the apartment complex about 6 months ago. It was one of those places where the rent was cheap enough that I could afford it without too much stress, but still decent enough that I wasn't worried about things falling apart. The building itself was a little older, but nothing too bad. The neighbors all seemed fine, and I had the usual routine of coming home from work, cooking dinner, and watching TV or reading until I went to bed. At first, everything felt normal. But after a few weeks, I started noticing something strange about the apartment next to mine. It was on the second floor, just down the hall. I'd never seen anyone come or go from there. It didn't seem like it was vacant, but no one ever seemed to leave. I could hear the sounds of my other neighbors coming and going, footsteps, doors opening and closing, voices now and then. But for that particular apartment, it was always eerily quiet. No lights ever seemed to come on, and the curtains were always drawn tight. I thought it was strange, but I didn't think too much of it at first. Maybe they were just quiet people, or maybe they worked odd hours. It was none of my business. But over time, the silence became more unsettling. Weeks went by, and I'd noticed more and more that the apartment was always dark. Not even the faint glow of a light coming through the crack in the door or under the door frame like I had in my place. Just complete blackness. The silence also stood out more. No sounds of a TV, no footsteps, no voices. It was like the apartment was completely abandoned, yet I still saw the same mail piled up by the door. I had some time one afternoon and decided to go down the hall to get a better look. I'd been curious about it for a while now, and I figured I could always knock, introduce myself, and see if they needed anything. Maybe they were new and just hadn't gotten around to meeting the neighbors yet. I approached the door. It was almost too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. I knocked a couple of times, but there was no response. I wasn't surprised. Maybe they weren't home, or maybe they just didn't want to talk to anyone. But what I noticed then was that the door was cracked open just a tiny bit. It wasn't much, just enough that I could see into the hallway. I should have just walked away. But something about it made me hesitate. The door had clearly been opened recently. There was no dust around the frame, no sign that it had been left untouched for long. And then, I made the stupid decision to push it open just a little bit more. Just to check. I didn't expect to see anything. I didn't expect what I saw at all. As soon as I nudged the door further open, I immediately realized something was wrong. The air inside the apartment felt stale, like it hadn't been ventilated for weeks. The whole place smelled faintly of mildew and something else I couldn't quite place, something sour, like old food or sweat. And the room was still dark, so dark that I couldn't make out anything at first. But then, my eyes adjusted. What I saw made my stomach drop. There was someone sitting in the far corner of the room, in complete darkness, their back to the door. The only thing I could make out clearly was the faint outline of their figure. They were hunched over, their head lowered, almost as if they were trying to stay out of view, like they were trying to hide. I froze in place, unsure if I should speak or back away. I didn't know if I should even go in or if I had somehow made a mistake. But before I could move or say anything, I heard a faint sound, a slow, shallow breath. It was as if they were trying not to make any noise, as if they knew I was there but couldn't make themselves move or speak. My heart was racing now, my breath shallow. I thought about closing the door, walking away, pretending I hadn't seen anything. But that would have felt wrong. I don't know why, but something inside me told me I needed to do something. I took a few more steps forward, still hesitant, still trying to process what was going on. I had no idea who this person was or why they were sitting in that apartment, but I knew something wasn't right. "Hello?" I called out softly, just loud enough for them to hear. "Are you okay?" The figure didn't respond, and for a moment, I thought maybe I was mistaken. Maybe it was just some kind of odd furniture, or maybe someone had left something in the room. But then, I saw it. Their heads slowly lifted, just a bit, and I caught the faint reflection of their eyes in the dark. They were wide, almost too wide, like they hadn't seen daylight in too long. Their skin was pale, and I could see now that they looked disheveled, dirty, like they hadn't taken care of themselves in months. I froze, unsure of what to do. I wanted to ask if they needed help, but I was suddenly scared. Something felt off about this whole situation. The person didn't move at first. They just stared at me from the shadows. Their eyes were intense, almost like they were sizing me up, like they were deciding if they could trust me or if I was a threat. I took a few cautious steps back toward the door, but that's when they finally spoke. "Who are you?" the person asked, their voice low and raspy, like they hadn't used it in days. I live next door. I heard something. I thought I heard someone in here. Are you all right?" There was a long pause, and I held my breath, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly. I haven't been out in a long time," they said, their voice trembling. "I wasn't supposed to be here. I just needed to stay hidden." They said I had to stay hidden. My stomach churned, and I suddenly felt sick. I had no idea who they were or what they were talking about, but I knew something wasn't right. I should have just turned around and left, but I felt like I couldn't. "I'm calling someone," I said, already pulling on my phone, my hand shaking. But before I could do anything, the figure in the corner let out a soft, frantic laugh, one that sent a shiver down my spine. "No one will help you. They don't know. You don't know." The fear crept into my bones, and I felt a chill wash over me. I stepped back, still holding my phone, but something inside me told me I had to leave the apartment right now. I couldn't stay there any longer. I turned and ran down the hallway, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't even look back. I didn't stop until I was safely back in my apartment, locking the door behind me and bolting the deadbolt. I don't know who that person was or why they were hiding in that apartment for so long, but I haven't seen them since. I've never heard a sound coming from that apartment either. It's still silent, just like it was before. I've tried to tell myself that it was a fluke, that maybe they were just someone who needed a place to hide. But every time I walk by that apartment, I wonder if they're still in there, hiding in the dark, waiting for someone to notice them again. I never liked going to the mall alone. It's not that I was scared of being around people or anything, it's just the noise, the crowds, the constant buzz of activity that always felt overwhelming after a while. But this particular Saturday, I didn't have a choice. I needed to pick up a few things for work, and I figured I could just get in and out quickly. I parked my car in the farthest corner of the parking lot, which was mostly empty, and made my way inside. It was a little busier than I expected for a Saturday afternoon, but nothing too bad. I was going to stick to the main stores, a quick stop in the tech store to pick up a charger, then maybe a little browsing in the clothing section of the department store. Just enough to get my errands done. I started off in the tech store. I was looking at phone chargers when I noticed someone standing near the entrance. At first, I didn't think much of it. It wasn't unusual to see people hanging around stores or near the entrances. But as I walked to another section of the store, I saw the same person standing a little further down, pretending to look at something else. It was a woman, maybe in her late 30s, with dark brown hair and a black jacket. She looked like she was just another shopper, but the longer I stood there, the more it seemed like she wasn't actually shopping. She kept glancing in my direction. I tried to shake it off, but the weird feeling wouldn't go away. I left the tech store and moved to the clothing store next door. I figured if I wasn't around her, I'd stop feeling paranoid. But when I walked in, I saw her again. She was on the other side of the store now, walking slowly, like she was browsing, but still too close. Every time I turned to look at something, I noticed she was still there, a few aisles over, but always facing me. I was trying to be casual about it, but the feeling of being watched started to make my skin crawl. I decided to test it, just to see if I was imagining things. I moved to another part of the store. She followed. I walked down an aisle, then around a corner. She followed. I didn't want to make a scene, but I could feel my anxiety building. Was she really following me, or was I just overthinking it? I finally couldn't stand it anymore. I stopped in front of a rack of clothes, pretending to look at something, and then glanced over my shoulder. There she was again. She was standing a little farther back this time, but still watching me. Not casually, either. She was staring directly at me. I turned around quickly, pretending to continue looking at the clothes. My heart was beating a little faster now. I could feel her eyes on me. I kept thinking, maybe I'm just being paranoid. She could be doing the same thing I'm doing, just shopping. But it didn't feel like shopping. It felt like something else, something deliberate. I walked toward the exit, hoping to make a clean break. But as I reached the door, she was there again. She wasn't in front of me, but she was standing off to the side, like she was waiting. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing. Was she really following me, or was I imagining things? I walked outside and headed toward my car, trying to stay calm. I didn't want to look back, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to check. Sure enough, she was still there, standing by the entrance, watching me. This time, I couldn't ignore it. It was too much. I turned around quickly and walked into the food court, figuring I could get some space and take a deep breath. I grabbed a seat at a table in the corner, still trying to calm myself down. But I couldn't focus on anything. My mind kept going back to her, how she was always just a few steps behind me, like she was tracking me. I kept scanning the area, watching for her, but I didn't see her. It almost felt like she had disappeared. I told myself maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was just tired, or I had been imagining things. But then, I felt a presence behind me. I turned around quickly, and there she was. She was standing right behind my chair now, close enough that I could smell her perfume, a sweet, overpowering floral scent. I hadn't heard her approach. I couldn't even remember her footsteps. She was too quiet, too still. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft, almost gentle, but it sent a chill down my spine. "I've been following you for a while. I just wanted to talk to you." I froze. I didn't know what to say. How could she know where I'd been? How could she know I was the one she was following? "I don't know what you want," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I could feel my throat tighten, like I couldn't get enough air. Her eyes softened, but they didn't lose that strange intensity. "I know you. I've been watching you for a long time. I know where you go every day. I know what you buy, what time you leave your house in the morning." I stared at her, my mind scrambling. She couldn't possibly know that. No one knew that about me. Not like that. "I don't know who you are," I said, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "You need to leave." Her gaze didn't waver. "I'm not going anywhere. You've been avoiding me for so long. I thought you would talk to me eventually. But I guess you didn't think I was real." I felt my pulse quicken. This wasn't just a coincidence anymore. She had been following me, tracking me, knowing things about me I'd never told anyone. She knew things I hadn't even realized. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I couldn't move. "Please, just leave," I said, trying to stand, but my legs were shaking too much. I knew I couldn't make it to the door without her following me. I didn't know what she wanted, but I had to get out of there. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then, finally, she took a step back, slowly. "I'm not done with you. I'll be around." That's when I stood up. I bolted for the exit without looking back. My heart was racing. I don't know how I made it to my car, but when I did, I locked the doors and sat there for a moment, just breathing, trying to calm myself. I've been back to that mall a couple of times since, but I haven't seen her again. I'm not sure if I ever will. But every time I go to a store or walk past someone in the mall, I can't shake the feeling that someone's watching me, that someone's out there, waiting. I didn't realize anything was wrong until I reached for my keys when I got back home that evening. I had been out for a few hours, nothing out of the ordinary. Just a quick trip to the store and a stop by the gym. I had double-checked everything before I left, like I always do. I was in the habit of making sure the doors were locked, all windows secure. So when I fumbled around in my pockets and didn't feel my house keys, I thought I must have left them on the kitchen counter or somewhere else in the car. But when I reached the door and found it ajar, that feeling of unease hit me. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the gap between the door and the frame. I wasn't sure what to think. I knew I had locked it when I left. I always lock it. Always. My mind began to race. Had I maybe forgotten? But I couldn't have. I had made sure. I stepped inside slowly, pushing the door open a little more, expecting the normal quiet of my house. But it wasn't quiet. It felt off. I'm not sure how to describe it. The air seemed thicker, heavier, and the faintest smell of something unfamiliar, maybe cologne, or some kind of cleaner, hit me. I couldn't remember smelling that when I left. At first, I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. I had a long day. Maybe I was just tired. But then I noticed something else. The kitchen table was not where I had left it. It wasn't a huge shift, just a few inches, but enough for me to notice. The chairs were pulled out slightly, like someone had been sitting there. But I knew I hadn't been home all day. I took a few more steps inside, and that's when I saw it. The small stack of books on the living room coffee table had been rearranged. Some of the books were now open, their pages turned to random spots. I never left them like that. I always kept everything neat. My mind started to race. Had someone broken in? I looked around, but everything seemed intact. No broken windows, no damage to the door. But that feeling of wrongness grew stronger. Someone had definitely been here. I walked cautiously through the house, checking the back door, then the kitchen again. Nothing looked disturbed in terms of property, but there was no denying that something had been moved. The strangest thing was that there was no sign of forced entry. The door was still locked, at least it had been when I left, and there was nothing out of the ordinary on the lock or the frame. It didn't make any sense. How could someone get in without leaving a trace? My heart started to pound in my chest. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd just been absent-minded, maybe I'd forgotten to lock the door, and maybe I had left things a little out of order earlier in the day. But then, I found something that shattered any hope of reasoning. I went upstairs, hoping to get some sense of control back. I was hoping that maybe I'd find something that would explain what was happening. When I walked into my bedroom, I stopped dead in my tracks. The bed was unmade. But not just unmade, it looked like someone had been lying in it. The covers were thrown haphazardly, the pillows were all over the place like they had been tossed around. I never left my bed like that. Never. The last time I'd made it, everything was neat, everything was exactly how I liked it. I looked around, panic rising in my throat. This couldn't be real. I started to walk back toward the stairs, and that's when I saw something else. A small piece of paper was stuck under the edge of the hallway rug, barely noticeable. I bent down and picked it up. It was a receipt, just a regular grocery store receipt. But it wasn't mine. I didn't recognize the items listed on it, and the date was from 2 days ago. I didn't remember going to that store. I held the paper in my hand, staring at it for a long time, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't possible. How could it be? I didn't know who had been in my house, but they clearly knew things I didn't. They were moving around like they belonged there. I couldn't even tell if it had been a break-in or if they had somehow used a key. I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. I had no idea what to do next. My phone was in the kitchen, and my first instinct was to call the police. But something stopped me. What would I say? Someone's been in my house, but I don't know who or how they got in. How could I explain it without sounding like I was imagining things? I decided to check the rest of the house, just to see if I could find something, anything, that would explain what was going on. I didn't want to leave the room, but I forced myself to move, my legs feeling heavy with each step. I went back downstairs, checking every closet, every nook and cranny. There was no sign of anyone, but the more I looked, the more unsettling it became. The fact that everything was just a little out of place, just enough to make me feel like I was going crazy, only made the situation worse. Then, I saw something else that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There was a small, half-open box by the front door. A box I had never seen before. I knelt down to look inside, and my stomach twisted into a knot. There were some items inside, personal things, things I'd never seen before. A picture frame with a photo of a woman and a child. A pair of keys. A small bottle of perfume I didn't recognize. None of it was mine. I stood there, frozen, the box in my hands, and I couldn't make sense of any of it. I was shaking now, trying to decide what to do. I had to call the police. There was no other choice. But just as I was about to dial, I heard a sound. A faint thud upstairs. My heart stopped. I stood there in the dark, waiting, listening. There was no more movement, no footsteps, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still here. Someone was still watching. I ran out the front door, and I didn't stop running until I was in my car, speeding down the street. I drove to a friend's house and told them what happened. They were understandably freaked out, but I couldn't go back to that house. Not yet. The next day, I went to the police, and they came over to check the house. They didn't find anything unusual. They checked the locks, the windows, everything, and confirmed that there was no sign of forced entry. But they couldn't explain the missing items or the fact that someone had been inside without leaving a trace. I've moved out since then. I couldn't live there anymore, knowing someone had been in my space, someone who knew more about me than I did about them. To this day, I don't know who they were or how they got in. But I do know one thing: I'll never be able to feel safe in my own home again. It was late, around 11:30 p.m., and I was leaving a friend's house after catching up over a few drinks. I wasn't exactly tipsy, but I wasn't fully sober either. I decided to take a taxi home instead of driving myself. It was just safer that way. The streets were mostly empty, which didn't surprise me. It was a quiet neighborhood, and most people were already home by that time. I flagged a cab down and got in without thinking too much about it. It had been a long day, and I just wanted to get home. The cab driver didn't greet me at first. He just nodded when I said my address, and that was it. It wasn't like I was expecting much conversation, but usually, drivers will ask about your day or make small talk. He didn't. He just started driving, and I could feel the silence hanging in the air. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he was having a rough night, just like I was. But there was something about the way he kept glancing at me through the rearview mirror that made me uneasy. It wasn't obvious, but it was like he was trying to keep it subtle, looking at me when I wasn't paying attention. I tried not to make a big deal out of it and focused on looking out the window, watching the city pass by. It helped calm my nerves a little. I kept glancing at the time on my phone. A few minutes passed. I could tell we were getting closer to my neighborhood because the streets were becoming more familiar. But then, the cab took a turn I wasn't expecting. The road was dark, and there were fewer streetlights. The buildings on either side looked like they were abandoned. I didn't recognize this road at all, and I started to feel a little panicked. My apartment wasn't far from here, but this didn't feel right. "Excuse me, where are we going?" I asked, my voice a little shaky. The driver didn't say anything right away. He kept driving, the engine rumbling in the quiet. I repeated myself, this time with a little more urgency. "Where are we going?" "This isn't the way to my place." He glanced at me through the rearview mirror, but his eyes didn't meet mine directly. Instead, he gave a kind of half nod. "Just a shortcut," he mumbled in a low voice, almost as if he was trying to avoid talking. I wasn't convinced. I knew the area well, and this was definitely not a shortcut. I had taken this route dozens of times, and there was no way this alley was on the way. My instincts were screaming at me now. "Stop the car." "I want to get out right now," I demanded, sitting up straighter and clenching my hands on the seat. My heart was pounding. The quiet hum of the car was the only sound, and it felt suffocating. The driver didn't respond. He just kept driving. We were in the alley now, and the streetlights were far behind us. I couldn't even tell if anyone else was around. It was so dark that I couldn't see past the hood of the car. "Stop the car," I shouted, my voice now fully panicked. I didn't know what to do, but I had to get out. I had to get away. Finally, the cab slowed down, but it didn't stop. Instead, he turned the wheel again, making a sharp turn into an even darker part of the alley. The streetlights were so far away now that it was impossible to see anything beyond the faint glow of the headlights. I could feel the panic rising in my chest. I had to get out. "Stop the car," I said again, this time louder, more desperate. But the driver didn't seem to care. His expression was unreadable, his face almost motionless as he drove deeper into the alley. "Please, I just want to get out," I pleaded, my voice shaking. Without thinking, I grabbed for the door handle. I had no idea if it would even open, but I wasn't going to wait for him to do anything. I just wanted to get out. As soon as I pulled the handle, the door opened, and I scrambled out of the car, not even caring if I was running into traffic. I didn't even look behind me. I just kept running. I didn't stop until I reached a street where there were some people. My legs were shaking, and I was out of breath. I tried to make sense of what had just happened, but I couldn't. I was so shaken up that I called a friend to pick me up. The next day, I was still rattled by the whole experience. Something didn't sit right with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something far more sinister was at play, so I decided to report the incident to the taxi company. I figured they'd just let me know it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. The woman who answered the phone was polite, but when I mentioned the driver's name and the cab's ID number, her tone shifted. There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I'm sorry, but we've had reports of similar incidents with that driver," she said quietly, as if hesitant to continue. "There have been multiple complaints. passengers saying they were taken off route, acting strange, and sometimes even driving them into dark alleys. I was stunned. I hadn't known about any of this. It sounded like a bad nightmare. The woman told me that they were investigating the driver, but she couldn't give me many details. What really got me was when she mentioned that the driver had been reported several times for behaving suspiciously toward women, particularly late at night. I felt a chill run down my spine. I realized then just how lucky I had been to get out of there when I did. Since that night, I've never taken a cab by myself again, especially at night. I'm still haunted by the thought of what could have happened if I hadn't reacted quickly. I never heard what happened to that driver, but I know one thing for sure. I won't trust a stranger behind the wheel ever again. I had just gotten back from the grocery store, and it was around 7 p.m. The sun was setting, casting an orange hue across the sky. I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to stretch my legs before dinner. The streets were quiet, with only a few cars driving by and a couple of neighbors out tending to their lawns. Nothing out of the ordinary. I had walked a few blocks when I heard the sound of crying. It was a soft, muffled sob, almost like a whimper. At first, I thought maybe it was a dog, but then I realized it was coming from a little ways down the street, near the old park that wasn't really used much anymore. It seemed strange to hear a child crying so late in the evening, so I started walking toward the sound. When I rounded the corner near the park, I saw a little boy, no more than 7 or 8 years old, standing on the sidewalk. His back was to me, but I could see his shoulders shaking, and he was crying. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should approach. Something felt off about the situation, but I didn't want to ignore a child in distress, so I took a step closer. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out gently. He turned around, and I saw that his face was tear-streaked, his eyes wide and red. He was wearing a blue hoodie and jeans, nothing too out of the ordinary. I can't find my mommy and daddy," he said in a small voice, his lip quivering. I was playing at the park, and when I looked up, they were gone. I don't know where they went. My heart sank. I could tell he was scared, and that just made me want to help him even more. I asked if he knew where they lived, and he nodded. He said his house was a few blocks away and pointed in the direction I had just come from. I told him not to worry, that we'd find his parents, and offered to walk him home. I started walking alongside him, trying to reassure him that everything would be fine. But as we reached the end of the block, the child suddenly stopped. I glanced down at him, expecting him to ask something, but instead, he was staring ahead, his little hand gripping his hoodie tightly. "Are you sure this is the way home?" I asked, looking around. The street was mostly empty, with just a few houses scattered in the distance. It didn't seem like there was much around here. The boy didn't respond. Instead, he suddenly jerked his head to the side, his eyes darting toward an alleyway between 2 houses. Without a word, he started running in the opposite direction, towards the alley. "Hey, wait!" I called out, taken by surprise. I rushed after him, calling his name, but he didn't look back. He was quick for such a small child, and I was starting to panic a little. Where was he going? Why was he running away from me? I turned the corner into the alley, but there was no sign of him. The streetlights hadn't been turned on yet, and the alley was dim, with shadows stretching across the pavement. I paused, trying to listen for any sign of movement, but everything was quiet. My heart was pounding in my chest, and a cold sweat started to form on the back of my neck. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Should I keep going? Should I call the police? But then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a flash of movement. The boy had stopped about halfway down the alley, standing motionless. He was facing away from me, his body rigid, as though he was waiting for something. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling now. I was starting to feel the weight of the situation press down on me. Something was definitely wrong. He turned slowly, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even sadness. It was cold. Empty. As though he wasn't a child at all. Without saying a word, he turned and started running again, this time deeper into the alley, past the point where I could see. I didn't think. I just started chasing him. I called out again, but he didn't stop. The alley was narrow, and I had to weave between garbage cans and dumpsters, trying to keep him in sight. He was fast, so much faster than I expected for someone his age, and I was starting to lose ground. As I rounded a corner, I realized the alley was leading to a part of the neighborhood I didn't recognize. There were no houses here, just abandoned buildings and overgrown lots. I stopped for a moment, panting, trying to get my bearings. Where had he gone? I scanned the area, but there was nothing. No sign of the boy. Just the empty street stretching out in front of me. My phone was still in my pocket, and I pulled it out to call for help, but before I could unlock it, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, my heart racing, but there was no one there. No boy. No one at all. I felt a sudden, sharp chill run down my spine. My instincts were screaming at me now, something was terribly wrong. I looked around again, but the silence was suffocating. It was too quiet. I had no idea where I was anymore. I turned back toward the alley's entrance, where I had come from. The streetlights were flickering now, and the darkness seemed to swallow everything. The boy was gone. I had no idea where he had gone or how he had disappeared so quickly, but I knew I needed to leave. I started walking back in the direction I came from, my pace quickening with every step. I kept my eyes fixed on the darkened alley, half expecting to see the boy standing there, watching me from the shadows. But nothing. I didn't stop until I was safely back on the main street, where I could see more houses and people walking their dogs. I felt a little safer there, but the unease still lingered. I was still shaking, my breath coming in short gasps. When I got home, I locked all the doors and checked the windows again, just to make sure. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something about that alley, about that child, didn't sit right with me. I still don't know who that boy was or why he ran from me. I never told anyone about it, not even my husband. I don't know if I'll ever really understand what happened that night, but I can't shake the thought that I almost walked right into something I shouldn't have. Something dangerous. Something that wasn't meant for me. I've always been the type of person to avoid asking for help. Pride, I guess, or just a strong belief that I could handle things on my own. But a few months ago, I had a rough patch. I had been out of work for a couple of weeks after a company downsized and let me go. Bills were piling up, and I was starting to drown in them. That's when I reached out to Darren. Darren and I had known each other for years. We hung out in college, partied together, even shared a couple of places when times were tough. He was a decent guy, always there to lend a hand when needed. So, when I found myself in a tight spot, he was the first person I called. I asked if he could lend me some money, just enough to get me through until my next paycheck, which I was sure was coming soon. He agreed without hesitation. At the time, I thought it was no big deal. Darren was always generous, and I was confident that I'd be able to pay him back in no time. We agreed on a small sum, something I could handle easily once my finances were back in order. No big deal, right? But things didn't go as planned. My paycheck came, but it wasn't as much as I had hoped. I had bills that I had to cover, so I used most of the money just to stay afloat. I tried to get by with what I had, but I still owed Darren that money, and I hadn't been able to pay him back on time. I started getting texts from him. They were polite at first, just simple reminders. "Hey man, don't forget about that money. Let me know when you can pay." I replied with excuses, how things were tight, that I was working on it, that I'd have it soon. But as days turned into weeks, his messages began to feel different. There was a shift in tone. One evening, after I'd just come back from a job interview, I was sitting on my couch when I got a text from Darren. It was short and blunt, "I need my money, now." I stared at the message for a while, trying to process it. Something about the way it was worded felt off, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe he was just frustrated, and who could blame him? I hadn't paid him back, and it was starting to feel like he was running out of patience. I sent him a reply, promising that I'd have the money in the next few days. The next day, Darren showed up at my apartment. I was surprised to see him at my door, but I figured it was just a friendly reminder. I opened the door, and before I could say anything, he stepped inside without asking. He didn't even smile, which wasn't like him. "I need the money," he said, his voice low and serious. He wasn't joking. His tone was sharp, like there was a weight behind his words. "I told you, Darren, I don't have it yet. I'll get it to you soon." "I swear," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could feel the panic starting to rise. He didn't say anything at first. Just stared at me. His eyes, usually friendly and warm, looked cold and hard. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "You don't understand," he said. "You're not in control anymore." I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to laugh it off, but the tension in the room was suffocating. "What's that supposed to mean?" His eyes never left mine. He took a step closer, almost as if he were testing my reaction. "You've been warned. If you don't pay me, things will get worse. I'm not a nice guy when I'm not paid." I tried to push past him, but he grabbed my wrist, his grip tight, unrelenting. I was in shock, staring at him, struggling to comprehend what was happening. This wasn't the Darren I knew. "Let go of me," I said, but my voice came out weaker than I wanted it to. He released my wrist, but his gaze didn't soften. If anything, it intensified. "I don't want to have to do anything you'll regret," he said quietly. "But I will if I have to." I stood there, frozen, not sure what to say. He turned and left without another word, leaving me standing in the middle of my living room, my heart racing. I wasn't sure what had just happened, but something felt horribly wrong. Over the next few days, Darren's behavior only grew more erratic. He started showing up at my apartment more frequently, knocking on my door even when I wasn't expecting him. Sometimes he would come just to remind me that he wanted the money. Other times, he wouldn't say anything at all. He'd just stand there, watching me, as if waiting for something. Then, things escalated. One night, I was on my way home from a late shift at my part-time job when I saw Darren's car parked outside my apartment building. I tried to ignore it, but as I walked toward the entrance, I saw him standing near the entrance, his hands in his pockets, staring at me. "You still don't have my money, do you?" he asked. His voice was low, almost menacing. "I'm working on it," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I told you, I'll have it soon." He stepped closer. "Soon isn't good enough anymore." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. "You're lucky I'm giving you more time." I tried to step around him, but he blocked my way, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You're not going anywhere until you pay me. Understand?" I looked at his face. His eyes were cold, and the smile that used to be so familiar to me now looked twisted. I felt like I was looking at a stranger, someone I didn't recognize. I never saw Darren again after that. I moved a few months later, changing my number and cutting all ties with anyone I knew through him. I never spoke to him again, but the fear never fully left me. I couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if I hadn't paid. What would Darren have done? What kind of people did he associate with? And, more than anything, I wondered how long I would have lasted before things got worse. "I'll have it in a few days," I repeated, trying to get away from him. I had no idea what else to say. The situation felt impossible, and I didn't know how to make it stop. "I don't trust you anymore," Darren said. He was so close now that I could feel his breath on my face. "I'll be back tomorrow. If you don't have my money, I'll make sure things get uncomfortable." I pushed past him then, nearly running up the stairs to my apartment. I locked the door behind me and sat there in the dark, my hands shaking. The next day, I did some digging. I went online, searching his name, trying to find something, anything that could explain what was happening. That's when I found it. Darren wasn't just some guy I used to hang out with. He had connections. He was involved with people who weren't so easy to escape from. People who didn't care about your excuses or your promises. I had gotten in way over my head. The next few days were a blur. Darren didn't leave me alone. He kept showing up, knocking on my door, sending me messages. He kept telling me that time was running out. And I knew he meant it. The more I tried to avoid him, the more desperate and dangerous he became. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I managed to scrape together enough money to pay him. I met him outside my building, handing him the cash as quickly as I could. He didn't smile. He didn't thank me. He just took the money, nodded, and walked away. I didn't think much of it at first. You know, the whole online dating thing. It had become pretty normal for me, meet someone new, chat for a bit, and see if there was any real chemistry. Sometimes it worked out. Most of the time, it didn't. But this time felt different. The guy I was talking to, Matt, seemed easygoing. We'd been texting for a week or so, and he seemed normal enough. Nothing weird. Just casual conversation. He suggested meeting up at a local restaurant, a place we both knew well, so it didn't feel like some out-of-the-way spot that could be sketchy. I arrived a little early, as usual. The restaurant was nice enough, busy, lively, with plenty of people around. I liked that. There's something comforting about being surrounded by others, you know? It makes you feel safer. I walked in, looked around for Matt, but I didn't see him right away. I thought I might have missed him or that he was running late. But then, as I stood by the entrance, I spotted him. He was sitting at a table in the corner with a wide grin on his face. It wasn't a friendly, welcoming grin. It was odd. Too wide. Too eager. His eyes were locked on me even before I stepped inside the restaurant. He hadn't even glanced down at the menu or looked around like anyone else would. He was just staring at me. I felt an immediate knot in my stomach. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Should I walk over and say something? Or just turn around and leave? Maybe I'd gotten the wrong vibe. I mean, it was possible I was just overthinking it, right? But no, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The longer I stood there, the more uncomfortable I felt. I decided to walk over anyway, trying to brush off the uneasy feeling. As I got closer, I smiled and waved, hoping to ease my nerves. But as soon as I did, his grin seemed to widen even more. It was unsettling, honestly. It wasn't like a polite smile. There was something strange about it. Something predatory. "Hey, Matt," I said, trying to sound casual as I approached the table. "Hey." "There you are," he said, his voice too loud, too cheerful. He stood up a little too quickly, like he couldn't wait to greet me. It almost felt rehearsed, as though he had been waiting for me to approach exactly like this. "Yeah, sorry I'm a little early," I said, awkwardly standing near the edge of the table, not sure where to sit. "No worries," he said, sitting back down. "I figured you'd be early, so I went ahead and grabbed a table." His smile never faltered, but something about his eyes seemed wrong. They were too focused, too intense. He didn't blink much, like he was trying to keep me in his line of sight at all times. I sat down across from him, still trying to shake off the weird feeling that had settled in my chest. He didn't seem to notice my discomfort. In fact, he seemed more excited than ever. "So, how's your day been?" he asked, his voice too chipper. "Good, just, work stuff." "Nothing too exciting," I replied, trying to keep the conversation light. He nodded, still grinning, and then leaned in a little closer. "So, how do you like the restaurant?" "It's pretty nice, right?" I looked around, trying to figure out what he meant. It was just a normal restaurant. Busy, decent food, nothing special. But why was he so focused on the setting? Why was he so intent on me being comfortable here? "It's good," I said slowly. "Yeah, I like it." But then, his grin faded just a little, just enough for me to notice the shift. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving mine. "I've been watching you," he said suddenly, his voice almost in a whisper. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even a question. It was a statement. I blinked, my heart racing. "What?" "I saw you walk in," he continued, still smiling, but now it felt like his expression was more calculating. "I saw you look around, look at the menu, trying to spot me. But I was watching you first." I froze. My stomach dropped. He was watching me? But how? I'd only just noticed him when I walked in. My mind started racing, trying to make sense of his words. Maybe he was just trying to make a joke, but it didn't feel like a joke. It felt wrong. "Ah, what do you mean by that?" I asked, trying to sound calm, but I could feel my voice tremble. He leaned in closer, the grin still there, but now his eyes seemed too sharp, too predatory. "I mean, I saw you standing there, just outside the door, looking around. You looked confused, unsure of what to do. I could tell you didn't see me yet. But I saw you, even before you saw me." I suddenly felt trapped. The air around us felt heavier, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stuck. Something in his tone, the way he was speaking, made it seem like he knew more than he should. Like he had been watching me long before I even saw him. I'm not sure what you mean," I stammered, suddenly aware of the way my hands were gripping the edge of the table. I wanted to leave. I wanted to stand up and walk away. But I couldn't. I didn't want to seem rude, and I was honestly terrified of what would happen if I got up and left. I didn't know this guy. Matt's eyes twinkled as if he knew I was uncomfortable. "It's all a joke, Just trying to get a rise out of you. It's funny, right?" I nodded quickly, trying to hide my unease. "Yeah, funny." good one. But the more he talked, the more I felt like I couldn't breathe. His presence was suffocating. The way he kept leaning in closer, his eyes never leaving mine, it made me feel like I was being pinned down. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "Don't worry, I won't bite," he said, his smile returning, but it didn't feel like reassurance. It felt like a warning. I couldn't sit there any longer. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm sorry, Matt, but I think I'm going to head out," I said, my voice trembling. His grin faltered for just a moment, but then he quickly masked it with another wide smile. "Oh, come on, don't be like that. I was just joking around. I thought we were having fun." "I'm sorry, but I really need to go," I said, my voice firmer this time. I grabbed my purse, backing away from the table. Matt didn't stop me. He just sat there, watching me with that same unsettling grin. All right, he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "It's all good. But I'll be seeing you again." That's when I knew. I didn't know how, but I knew. I had to get out of there. I turned and walked quickly toward the door, my pulse pounding in my ears. The whole time, I could feel his eyes on me, even though I didn't dare look back. I stepped outside, my hand shaking as I dialed a cab. I kept glancing around, making sure no one was following me. The restaurant felt like a lifetime away by the time I finally got into the cab, but I could still hear his voice in my head, his grin seared into my memory. I never went on another blind date again. And I made sure to never ignore the feeling that something was wrong, even if I couldn't put my finger on it. It started with a simple message. I didn't think much of it at first. You know how it is, random people add you on social media all the time, especially if you have a somewhat public profile. They either want to follow your content, or they're spammers trying to sell something. I get a lot of those messages, so when I saw a notification from someone I didn't recognize, I just assumed it was more of the same. The message was short and strange. Just one sentence: "I know where you work." At first, I thought it was a joke, some kind of weird spam trying to get my attention. I was busy with work that day and didn't really give it much thought. But then, it happened again the next day. This time, the message read, "I saw you at your job today. You looked tired." I paused when I saw that one. How could they know that? I hadn't posted anything about my work that day, and I didn't remember seeing anyone I didn't know while I was there. It made me uncomfortable, but I still convinced myself it was a coincidence. Maybe they saw me coming out of the building, or maybe it was just a creepy but harmless message. I didn't respond, but that didn't stop the messages. A few days later, I got another one. This time, it was different. "I know where you live." This is when I started feeling real unease. I hadn't shared my address anywhere, and it wasn't public knowledge. The more I thought about it, the more it didn't add up. How could someone know where I lived? I checked my social media settings to make sure everything was private. Nothing looked off. But there it was. The message. I didn't respond. I blocked the account immediately. It felt like the right thing to do. But then the next day, another message popped up, this time from a completely different account, almost as if they knew I'd blocked them. It felt like they were one step ahead of me. "I saw you leave for your run this morning. You run the same route every day, don't you?" I felt my stomach drop. I had been running the same route for months. I'd posted a photo of myself doing it once or twice, but I didn't think anyone could really track me from that. Could they? How did they know I ran that route? The thought made me sick. I felt like I was being watched. The messages continued to come every day. Sometimes there were no words at all, just a photo. The first one was of my car, parked outside my apartment building, taken from the street. The next day, there was a photo of my workplace, with me walking out the front door in the background. I didn't even see the person who took the photo. I'll be at your building tonight. Hope you're not working late. That was the first message that really got to me. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? That someone had messaged me a few times and knew where I lived and worked. It seemed too small to be a real threat. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was getting worse. I spent that night checking my locks, making sure everything was secure. I moved the furniture near the windows and made sure the curtains were drawn tightly. I didn't sleep much that night. A couple of days later, when I thought it had calmed down, the messages started up again. This time, they were more specific. I saw you leave your building this morning. I know you didn't lock the front door. I hadn't. I had been in a rush that morning, and in my rush, I'd forgotten to lock the door when I left. The thought of someone seeing that made my skin crawl. The messages were no longer just creepy notes about my daily life. They were like personal attacks, like this person was getting closer and closer to me. The next message included a photo of my front door, taken from the street. And the message underneath it. I've been inside your place. I froze. The blood drained from my face. My stomach twisted in knots. How? There was no way this person could have gotten in. My building had security cameras, and I had always been careful about who I let into my apartment. How could they possibly know what was inside? I felt completely exposed, helpless. That's when I realized that this wasn't just a person who knew where I worked or lived. They knew my habits, my routines. They knew what time I left for work, what time I came home. They knew where I went for lunch and what stores I frequented. The person seemed to be tracking my every move. They were always one step ahead, waiting for me to slip up. I started changing my routine. I started locking every door twice and making sure every window was secure before I left for the day. I even went so far as to change my usual running route, just to be safe. I started getting nervous every time I left my apartment, wondering if they were watching me, waiting for me to make another mistake. I never went to the police. I should have, but I didn't. I don't know why. I guess I kept convincing myself that I could handle it on my own, that it wasn't that serious, that it was just some crazy person sending creepy messages. But when I thought about it more, I realized how bad it had gotten. I didn't recognize the first account that messaged me, but the second one, the one that had been sending me photos, that account was somehow connected to someone I knew. I don't know how I figured it out, but after a little digging, I found the link. One of my old coworkers, someone I hadn't talked to in a while, had a profile under a different name. A profile that I could tell was the one behind all of this. It made no sense. We weren't even close. We had been friendly in the office, but we'd never exchanged more than small talk. There was no reason for them to do this. No reason for them to stalk me. But it was them. I had enough evidence now, enough clues to piece it together. I confronted them, though it wasn't in person. I messaged them directly, asking why they were doing this. There was no immediate response, but after a while, I got one. It was simple. You should have left me alone. I blocked them after that. Completely. I locked down my social media profiles, changed my phone number, and I didn't go anywhere familiar for a while. I didn't tell anyone about it at first, mostly out of embarrassment. I wasn't sure how I could explain that I had let someone get so close to me, someone who I thought was just another random person on the internet. Eventually, the messages stopped. They never resurfaced. Maybe they were just a sick joke. Maybe they just wanted to make me feel afraid. But it took a long time for me to feel safe again. I still don't know how they knew so much about me. I still don't know how they got so close. All I know is, it was real. I don't know how long it would have taken before I realized what was really happening if I hadn't figured it out when I did. And I never want to find out. It was one of those nights where you can't seem to fall asleep, no matter how hard you try. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard the knock. It wasn't like a gentle tap. It was firm, loud, like someone was determined to get my attention. It was late, too late for anyone to be stopping by, especially uninvited. I sat up, my heart racing a little, wondering who it could be. I hadn't been expecting anyone, and it was well past midnight. I cautiously made my way to the door, looking out the peephole. I could see a man standing on the other side, his back turned. He seemed like he was waiting for someone. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. Should I open the door? Should I just ignore it? I figured it was probably a mistake, maybe a neighbor who had the wrong apartment. It happens, right? People knock on the wrong doors all the time. So, I opened it a crack. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to sound calm. The man turned toward me, and I immediately regretted opening the door. He didn't look threatening, not exactly, but there was something about him, an uneasy energy that I couldn't place. He was in his mid-30s, dressed in a jacket and jeans, and his eyes were tired, like he hadn't slept in days. "I'm looking for someone," he said, glancing around as if expecting the person to be standing right there. "Who are you looking for?" I asked, my voice a little shakier than I meant it to be. "A woman named Sarah. Does she live here?" He didn't wait for me to answer before asking again. "Are you sure?" I could have sworn this was her place. I shook my head. "Sorry, no Sarah lives here. You must have the wrong apartment." He seemed taken aback for a second, but then he just nodded slowly. "My mistake. Sorry to bother you." I was ready to close the door when he spoke again. "I'll check tomorrow, just to be sure," he said, his voice lower now. He gave me an odd look, one that made me feel like I was being scrutinized in a way that wasn't entirely normal. I quickly closed the door and locked it, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling his presence left behind. I figured maybe he was just lost, or maybe he had the wrong address. It wasn't a big deal. That is, until the next night. I was in bed again, half watching TV, when I heard the knock. This time, it was even more insistent. I had no doubt it was the same person. My stomach twisted with unease, but I tried to ignore it. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I had no reason to think he would come back. Still, I couldn't help myself. I got up and checked the peephole. There he was. Same clothes, same tired eyes, and this time, he was standing closer to the door. His posture was rigid, almost as if he was waiting for me to open it. I didn't want to answer, but there was a nagging curiosity pulling at me. Who was this guy? Why was he so determined to find Sarah? I took a deep breath and opened the door a crack again. "I told you yesterday, no one named Sarah lives here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was an odd smile, forced and uneasy. "I must have made a mistake again," he said, his voice almost too calm. "I'll just check one more time." He stepped back, as if he was preparing to leave, but I could tell something was off. His eyes lingered on me for a moment too long, and I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I quickly shut the door and locked it again, my hand shaking slightly. Something wasn't right. The next few days passed without incident. I convinced myself I had overreacted, that maybe the man was just confused or lost. But deep down, I knew I hadn't imagined the feeling that something was wrong. He hadn't acted like someone just looking for a lost friend. There was something more to it, but I couldn't figure out what. Then, 2 days later, he showed up again. This time, I was more prepared, but I still didn't know what to do. I wasn't sure if I should call the police or just ignore him. The knock was louder than usual, and it made my heart race. I grabbed my phone, trying to figure out what to say when I answered the door. I stood by the door for a long time, debating, until I finally worked up the courage to open it. There he was again. "I told you to stop coming here," I said, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. "No one named Sarah lives here." I've said it 3 times now. But this time, his demeanor had changed. He wasn't smiling. In fact, he didn't seem nearly as apologetic as he had the first 2 times. Instead, there was a coldness in his eyes, something darker. "I know you're lying," he said, his voice low and tight. "She's here. She has to be." "Look," I said, trying to stay calm, "you need to leave. You're scaring me." He stepped forward, just slightly, and my breath caught in my throat. "Let me in," he said, his tone almost pleading. "I just need to see her." I shook my head. "No. I'm calling the police if you don't leave right now." He hesitated, staring at me for a long moment. I wasn't sure if he was actually going to leave or if he was just trying to intimidate me further. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy on the pavement. I immediately locked the door and backed away from it, my heart racing. I didn't know who this man was or why he was so obsessed with finding Sarah, but I knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to stop. The next few days, I stayed on high alert. I didn't leave my apartment much, and when I did, I kept an eye on the door, making sure it was always locked. I started checking the peephole before opening it, and I began to feel like a prisoner in my own home. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching me. But what was worse was the nagging thought in the back of my mind: what if he came back with a weapon? What if he was dangerous? Then, about a week later, I got a call from a blocked number. I answered, my hand shaking. "Hello?" I said, trying to sound calm. It was him. The man. "You didn't think I was gone, did you?" His voice sent chills down my spine. "I'm calling the police," I said, my voice trembling. "Go ahead," he replied. "But they won't be able to help you. You'll see." The call ended abruptly, and I stood there, frozen. I felt like I had to do something. I couldn't just wait for him to show up again. I called the police then, explaining everything I could. They said they would send an officer to check things out, but I knew it wasn't enough. After the officer came by and confirmed that there was no immediate threat, the man didn't show up again. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small sense of relief. But I knew I'd never feel completely safe again, not until I knew who he was and why he'd been showing up at my door. It wasn't until I moved away to a new city that the visits stopped. And even then, I can still hear that voice sometimes, that strange, threatening tone that had stayed with me long after the door had closed. I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't called the police. I don't know if I'll ever know. I had always been the kind of person to stick to a routine. I didn't stray from the things I knew: work, errands, my quiet little life. So when I called in a prescription to my local pharmacy, I didn't think twice. I was low on medication and needed it refilled, so I placed the order over the phone and figured I'd stop by the next day to pick it up. The pharmacy was only a short drive from my apartment, just a few minutes down the road. Nothing about it seemed strange. The building was small, tucked between a couple of local shops in a quiet strip mall. I'd been there plenty of times before. I knew the pharmacist by face. His name was David, a tall guy, maybe in his late 30s, with a quick smile and a calming voice. It was one of those places where you're just used to the people who work there, and everything feels routine. When I got to the pharmacy, it was just after lunch. The small waiting area was empty except for a couple of chairs near the counter. I approached the counter, expecting David to be behind it like usual. But it wasn't David. Instead, a woman, probably in her early 50s, stood there. She smiled warmly when she saw me. "Hi, can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft and polite. I nodded, not thinking much of it. "I'm here to pick up a prescription. I called it in yesterday." She cut me off with a soft, "Oh, yes, I see it. Just one moment." She turned and shuffled through a few things behind the counter, and I noticed a couple of people in the aisle picking out toiletries. I didn't pay much attention, just waiting for my medication to be handed over so I could go back home. It wasn't until she turned back around and handed me the bag that I realized something was off. She looked at me, a small smile playing on her lips. "Here you go, Miss Kelly." My heart stopped for a moment. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "Miss Kelly. Your prescription, right?" I blinked, confused. "No, I'm not Miss Kelly. The woman's smile faltered, and her brow furrowed just slightly. She checked the name on the bag again, then looked back at me. It says here Miss Kelly. Are you sure you're not?" I felt a chill run down my spine, my pulse quickening. There had to be a mistake. "No," I said, feeling suddenly a little uneasy. "My name is Emily Carter. I'm pretty sure this is the right prescription though. I called in just yesterday." The woman paused for a moment, then looked down at the prescription in her hand again. "Oh, I see. I'm terribly sorry about that," she said, sounding suddenly apologetic. "We must have mixed up the names. Let me just..." Before she could finish, I caught a glimpse of the prescription bag. It was the right medication, the one I had ordered, but it did indeed have the name Kelly printed on it. I didn't know a Kelly. I wasn't sure how they could have mixed up my name for someone else's, but it didn't seem like a huge deal. The woman was acting like it was nothing. "Could you double check?" I asked, my voice coming out a bit sharper than I meant it to. I don't know why, but there was something off about the whole situation. She gave a small laugh, clearly trying to ease the tension. "Oh, of course, dear. I'll get it fixed right away. Just a second." She turned and began to tap away on her computer, but I could feel her eyes flicker toward me, studying me in a way that made me uncomfortable. I stepped back a little, glancing around the small pharmacy. The other customers had left by now, and the place felt eerily quiet. The woman was still typing away, muttering to herself. A few moments passed before she turned back around, her expression less cheerful. She handed me the bag again. "I'm terribly sorry, Miss Carter. We had a mix-up with the name. There's no other prescription for you here, and I can assure you this is the right one." I took the bag, still unsure of what to make of the situation. Something wasn't sitting right with me, and I couldn't place it. I stared at her for a moment, trying to figure out if I was just being paranoid. But then, as I turned to leave, she stopped me. "I do hope that's the last of it, Miss Kelly. We wouldn't want you to have any issues again, would we?" Her voice was gentle, but the tone shifted. There was a weight to her words now, a slight edge. I froze. I didn't know what to say. Her words didn't make sense. How could she know anything more? I hadn't told her anything about myself beyond my name. I hadn't given her any reason to act like she knew me, especially like that. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What did you mean by that?" She smiled again, that same odd, too polite smile. "Just a slip of the tongue. No harm meant, Miss Kelly. Have a good day now." I stepped backward toward the door, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. I was sure I was imagining things, but it was hard to shake off the feeling that something had just gone very wrong. I took the prescription and left without another word. As I drove back to my apartment, I kept going over the conversation in my head. The way she had smiled when she said my name. The way she had spoken to me like she knew something I didn't. But it was just a mistake, right? She just mixed up the names. That was all. But when I got home and looked at the prescription again, I realized there was something I hadn't noticed before. There was an address on the label. Not mine. Not even close. It was an address that I'd never seen before. Not a street I recognized. Not a city I'd ever lived in. But it was right there, printed in black ink under my name. I didn't understand. It didn't make sense. How had they gotten that address? I immediately called the pharmacy back, my hands shaking. I asked to speak to the pharmacist. The woman I had spoken to answered the phone again. "Hi, this is Jessica. How can I help you?" I took a deep breath. "You gave me the wrong prescription earlier. It has someone else's address on it." There was a pause. Then she said, very calmly, "Oh, I'm sure it's just a mix-up. Don't worry, Miss Kelly. We'll take care of it." "No," I said, my voice rising now. "I'm not Miss Kelly. You gave me the wrong prescription. You've been calling me that, and I don't know why." There was a moment of silence. "You really should be careful, Miss Kelly," she said softly. "We wouldn't want you to make things worse." My blood went cold. I hung up, my mind racing. I didn't know what to think, but I knew something was wrong. Something serious. The address on that prescription didn't belong to me, and I had no idea who Miss Kelly was, but I had a bad feeling that I wasn't just dealing with some mix-up at the pharmacy. There was more to this than I could understand. I ended up calling the police that night, giving them all the information I had. They were polite but didn't seem as concerned as I felt. They said they'd look into it, but that didn't bring me any comfort. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Jessica's words, the strange tone in her voice, and that address. There was something that didn't add up. And to this day, I don't know who Miss Kelly is. But I do know one thing. I haven't been back to that pharmacy. It all started on a regular Tuesday evening. I had just finished work and was sitting in my kitchen, mindlessly scrolling through my phone while I waited for dinner to finish cooking. It was the usual quiet, mundane kind of night. My family lives about an hour away, so I don't get to see them often, but we talk on the phone now and then, just to catch up. At around 7:45, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I assumed it was a call from my aunt. She had been trying to get in touch with me for a few days, so I answered without hesitation. "Hello?" A voice, frantic and out of breath, came through the line. It was definitely her. "Emily, it's me. You have to come right now. Please, they're here. They're in the house." I don't know what to do," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't know how much longer I can stay quiet. You have to hurry." My heart dropped to my stomach. I couldn't even process what she was saying at first. "What do you mean? Who's in the house? What's going on?" I demanded, my voice trembling with panic. She cut off abruptly, and for a moment there was nothing but silence. Then I heard the sound of a door creaking. A muffled voice in the background, a man's voice, came through the phone. It wasn't hers. "Emily, listen to me. I need you to get here now. Please don't tell anyone where you're going," she whispered. "I don't know how much time I have." I froze, not knowing what to do. I barely even heard her last words. The sound of the unfamiliar voice in the background had shaken me to the core. I felt like I was about to collapse, but I quickly gathered myself. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door. I couldn't just sit there. My aunt needed me. I didn't waste a second. I jumped into my car, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The whole drive to her house felt like a blur. I tried calling her back, but the line was dead. No response. By the time I arrived, my thoughts were spinning. Something didn't feel right. The lights in her house were on, but the front door was slightly ajar, just enough for me to see the dim glow from inside. I pulled into the driveway, my heart racing. I checked my phone again. No new messages. No calls. I got out of the car and walked up to the door, my breath coming in short bursts. I called out softly, trying to sound calm. "Aunt Lisa? Are you there? It's Emily." I waited for a moment, but there was no response. The door was still slightly open, so I stepped inside cautiously, calling her name again. "Aunt Lisa?" I took a few steps into the living room, and that's when I heard the phone ringing. My phone. It startled me at first. I pulled it out of my pocket and looked at the screen. It was my aunt calling. I let out a relieved sigh, quickly answering the phone. "Aunt Lisa? Are you okay?" "I'm here." But it wasn't her voice that greeted me. "Emily?" The voice on the other end was eerily calm, too calm. It was definitely a woman, but it wasn't my aunt. "No, this is Emily." "Who's this?" I demanded, my pulse beginning to race again. I glanced around the darkened living room, trying to focus on the phone call. There was a pause, then the woman on the other end sighed heavily, almost like she was annoyed. "It's me. Aunt Lisa. I'm fine, don't worry. Everything's fine, Emily. You don't have to come over here." I felt the blood drain from my face. I was standing in her living room, hearing her voice on the phone, and yet the woman on the other end was claiming everything was fine. I looked around, my mind working overtime to make sense of what was happening. "Then why did you call me earlier and say you were in danger?" I asked, my voice sharp with confusion and fear. "Oh, I'm sorry," the woman said, a little too casually. "I guess I just got carried away. Everything's fine, Emily. Just relax, okay? Go home." I couldn't breathe. Something was wrong. This wasn't my aunt. It couldn't be. The voice was too calm, too controlled. I should have felt a sense of relief, but instead, all I felt was dread creeping over me like a thick fog. "Where are you?" I demanded, my voice now trembling. "What's going on?" Who are you talking to? There was a pause on the other end of the phone. A long one. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. You need to leave now, the woman said, her tone suddenly changing. It was cold, sharp. You're not supposed to be here. You'll be fine. Go home. Now. My heart was racing. My mind was spinning. This was not my aunt. Someone had called me, pretending to be her, and now I was standing in her house, hearing a completely different voice telling me to leave. I knew I had to get out. My body was moving before I even fully processed what was happening. I spun on my heel, my legs almost giving out under me. I ran back to the front door, my phone still pressed to my ear, but the line was dead. No more ringing, no more talking. Just dead silence. I stumbled up the door and into my car, not even bothering to lock it behind me. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I started the engine and sped away from the house. I didn't know who was in there. I didn't know if they were still in there. But I knew that I couldn't stay. As I drove back to my apartment, I dialed my aunt's number again. It rang several times before she finally picked up. Hello? She sounded normal, too normal. I let out a shaky breath. Aunt Lisa, what is going on? I just left your house. Someone was pretending to be you, and they said, Emily, what are you talking about? Her voice was confused, almost annoyed. I'm fine. I've been fine. I don't know what you're talking about. I never called you. I stopped in the middle of the road, my heart pounding in my chest. My aunt was safe. She was at home. No one had been in danger. It was all a lie. The person who had called me earlier, who had convinced me to drive over there, was not her. It wasn't her voice. It wasn't her at all. I drove straight to the police station. There was no way I was letting this go. The woman on the phone wasn't my aunt, and whoever was pretending to be her was still out there. They had gotten into my head, made me believe something terrible was happening. It wasn't until I got to the police that I realized how dangerous it was. But I got out safe. They traced the call. It came from a payphone several miles away, and there was nothing linking the call to my aunt or her address. No trace of anyone trying to get inside her house, no evidence of anything unusual. But someone had been watching. Someone had been pretending. And the worst part? I still don't know who that was. I never thought anything of it when I hired a handyman to fix my roof. It seemed like a simple enough task. My roof had been leaking for a while, and I had been putting it off, mostly because I wasn't sure who to call. I found his number on a flyer that was posted on a local bulletin board, and after a quick phone call, we arranged a time for him to come over. He was polite, professional, and seemed to know exactly what he was doing. His name was Dave. He showed up on time, carried his tools with him, and immediately got to work. The whole thing seemed completely normal, and after a while, I started to feel like I had nothing to worry about. He worked quickly, climbing up and down the ladder to fix the roof, and I went about my day inside the house. I hadn't really interacted with him much except to offer him a bottle of water. I figured that was all that needed to be said. I'd leave him to his job, and he'd leave when it was done. Simple. After a couple of hours, he called down from the roof. Hey, I'll need to use the bathroom. Do you mind? I didn't think anything of it at the time. I told him it was fine and pointed him toward the guest bathroom. I had nothing to hide, and I was getting busy with some work of my own, so I didn't think twice. It was when he came back that something started to feel off. He seemed to linger in the hallway a little longer than necessary, as if he was looking around, taking in his surroundings. I didn't pay it much attention at first. I was too absorbed in my own thoughts. But then, after a moment, he cleared his throat and asked, "Do you live here alone?" His tone wasn't intrusive, but the question itself was strange. It wasn't something that had been discussed before. "Yeah," I replied. "I do." "Ah, I see," he said, nodding slowly as if he was satisfied with the answer. There was an odd pause. I chalked it up to small talk and told myself I was being paranoid. He was just making conversation, right? But then I noticed it, something I should have seen earlier. As I turned back to what I was doing, my eyes caught the corner of his phone, which was sitting on the counter by the kitchen. I could see a few pictures on the screen. It was hard to make them out at first, but I noticed one thing that stood out immediately, a picture of my living room. It wasn't a picture I had taken. In fact, it wasn't a picture anyone would have taken unless they'd been inside my house. The angle, the way the couch was positioned, the little details that only someone who had actually been there would have noticed. I froze. I didn't say anything, but I could feel my pulse quicken. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe it was just a random photo of another living room. But as I looked closer, I could see that it was definitely my house, my living room. I tried to act casual. "Is that your phone?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. He looked down at it quickly and then smiled. "Oh, yeah. Sorry about that." He quickly put the phone face down, his smile never wavering. I must have accidentally left that on the counter. I wasn't convinced. I didn't know what to make of it, but something felt wrong. That photo had been taken from an angle I didn't recognize, from somewhere near the hallway. And then, I noticed another picture. This one was a close-up shot of the hallway itself, but from a different angle than I had ever seen it. This wasn't just a casual mistake. He had been inside my house when I hadn't been looking. He had taken pictures of my home. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing the look on my face. I didn't answer right away. My mind was still spinning. My eyes went back to the phone, the picture still haunting me. I wanted to confront him, but I didn't know how to. I glanced at him again, trying to hide my unease. "Yeah. It's fine." I had to get him out of there. My thoughts were racing, and I was struggling to stay calm. I turned back to the kitchen and grabbed a glass of water to steady my nerves. I needed to think. I kept my back to him, and when I heard him step into the living room, I grabbed my phone from the counter, as casually as I could. I opened it up and texted a close friend, telling them to call me in 5 minutes, acting like I was just going about my day. I didn't know if I was overreacting, but everything about the situation felt wrong. A few minutes passed, and I heard him move again, climbing back up the ladder to finish the last bit of work. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling that had settled deep in my chest. My phone buzzed just like I had planned, and I picked it up as if I hadn't been expecting it. "Hey, what's up?" I said, trying to sound normal, even though my stomach was in knots. "I'm fine," my friend replied, picking up on my tone. "You sound a little off. Everything okay over there?" I looked around the room quickly, trying not to let my voice crack. "Yeah, just a little tired. Nothing to worry about." I kept talking to my friend for a few minutes, not saying much of anything important, just small talk to pass the time. I needed to buy myself a little more time. When I hung up, I took a deep breath and stood still, listening to the sounds of the ladder shifting. Dave was finishing up the work, and I knew he'd be leaving soon. But I still couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't imagining things. I had to act fast. I needed to know what was on that phone. After another couple of minutes, he came back inside, carrying his tools, smiling like everything was normal. "All done," he said, his tone still friendly. "Everything looks good now. You won't have any more leaks." "Great," I said, forcing a smile. "Thanks for doing it so quickly." "Of course," he replied. "It was a pleasure working here. Let me know if you need anything else." He gathered his things, and I stood at the door, watching him leave. When he walked past the front porch, I stepped back inside, closing the door behind me. My heart was still racing, but I knew I had to go through with it. I went straight to the kitchen counter, grabbed his phone, and flipped it over. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the pictures. The first one was of the living room. The second, the hallway. There was another one taken from behind the kitchen door, showing the back of my head while I had been standing at the counter, completely unaware. I felt sick to my stomach. I didn't waste any more time. I called the police. I explained the situation, told them about the photos, about how I felt like something wasn't right. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I knew I couldn't let this slide. They told me to stay put and that they'd send someone over to check things out. I was still shaken up when the officer arrived, and after a brief conversation, he told me that he'd talked to Dave, that they had records on him from previous complaints. I didn't hear from Dave after that. The officer returned the phone to me, and I immediately wiped all the data from it. It wasn't just that Dave had been inside my home, taking photos when I wasn't looking. It was the way he acted, how he'd lingered too long, how he'd made small talk that felt more like an interrogation. I couldn't ignore that feeling of being watched, even after he left. I'm still not sure what his intentions were. I'll never know for sure. But I'm thankful I trusted my gut and didn't let it go. I've never hired a handyman since, and I never will. It's been months, but I can't stop thinking about how easily someone can get into your life without you even noticing. I still don't know exactly what happened that night, but I'll never forget it. It was just past midnight when I got the first call. At first, I thought it was a wrong number, or maybe someone trying to prank me. It wasn't that unusual, really. There were a lot of robocalls or random wrong numbers that came through, especially late at night. But this one felt different, and I don't know why. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone when the call came in. I didn't recognize the number. Normally, I'd ignore it, but for some reason, I picked it up. Maybe it was because I was bored, or maybe I just had a feeling. I don't know. When I answered, there was nothing but silence. At first, I figured it was just some automated system malfunctioning, so I didn't say anything. I waited for a second, then said, "Hello?" Nothing. Just complete silence. Then I heard something else, something I can't forget. Breathing. It was slow and heavy, like someone was standing right there, just breathing into the phone. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, but it felt off. Almost deliberate, like they were waiting for me to react. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was on the other end, listening to me, waiting for me to do something. I hung up quickly. My heart was beating a little faster than normal, and I thought about blocking the number, but I figured it was nothing. People prank call all the time, right? That's what I told myself. But then it happened again. 2 nights later. It was the same time, just after midnight, when my phone rang again. This time, I wasn't as quick to answer, but something made me do it anyway. I guess I just didn't want to let whatever it was continue without knowing what was going on. So I picked it up. "Hello?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. This time, there was no silence. There was just the sound of heavy breathing, like before. But this time, it was accompanied by a low, almost growling sound. I could hear the static of the phone line buzzing in the background, but the breathing was the loudest. The growl stopped after a moment, but the breathing didn't. It just kept going, and it felt like it was coming from somewhere inside the house. I froze. I know it sounds dramatic, but I felt like I couldn't breathe either. Something about it just wasn't right. I couldn't move. I just sat there, holding the phone to my ear, unable to do anything. Then, through the breathing, I heard it. A voice, low and hushed, barely above a whisper. Look outside. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't process what had just been said. My mind raced. Look outside? Who the hell was on the other end of the phone? What did they want from me? I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to get up, but I also didn't want to be paralyzed with fear. The voice was still there, breathing in and out. I had to know what was happening. So, I slowly put the phone down, not breaking eye contact with the screen. I walked over to the window, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel my breath shallow as I approached the curtains. I didn't want to look out there, but something was pushing me to do it. It felt like the phone call wouldn't stop until I looked. I grabbed the edge of the curtain and pulled it back just slightly. The streetlight outside my apartment cast an eerie glow on everything, but I didn't see anyone. Just a few empty cars parked along the road. The trees were still. No one was there. I felt a wave of relief, but that relief didn't last long. The phone rang again. I rushed to answer it, but by the time I picked up, it was too late. The line was already silent, and the caller had hung up. I sat there, staring at the phone, wondering what the hell just happened. My mind was racing with questions. Was it just a coincidence? Was someone messing with me? It didn't make sense. If it was a prank, it wasn't like any prank I'd ever heard of. The calls didn't stop after that. They kept coming, and they kept getting worse. The next time it happened, I tried to be more prepared. But the breathing was still there, slow and heavy, like before. I tried to stay calm, to ask questions, but every time I did, the caller would just say things like, "You're alone. I can see you," or "I'm right outside." That's when things started to get really bad. The caller started giving me specific details about my life. They knew my routine. They knew where I worked. They knew what time I left for work, when I came home, and how long I usually stayed at the grocery store. The more they talked, the more I realized they had been watching me. And not just in a general way, but in a detailed, obsessive way. I started to get paranoid. I locked the doors, checked the windows, but still, the calls kept coming. And I started to notice things, little things, that made me feel like I was being watched. Sometimes, I'd feel like someone was standing just outside my window, watching me, but I could never see anyone when I looked. One night, after work, I came home to find a note on my doorstep. It was simple, typed on a single sheet of paper. "I'm waiting for you." I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to go to the police because I didn't have anything concrete. Just a series of strange calls and a note. But I knew I couldn't keep living like this. The calls were becoming more frequent, more specific. They knew my house, knew my routine. I was trapped. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. It felt like I was living in a nightmare. I decided I couldn't stay there anymore. I stayed with a friend for a couple of nights, hoping the calls would stop. But they didn't. I started to feel like I couldn't even leave the house without looking over my shoulder. My anxiety reached a point where I didn't feel safe anywhere. Then, one night, While I was staying at my friend's place, I got another call. I didn't want to pick it up. I almost didn't. But something in me told me I had to. I picked up the phone. It was the same voice. But this time, it didn't say anything about me or my routine. Instead, it said something that made my blood run cold. I'm watching you. You can't run anymore. I couldn't stay at my friend's house forever. The paranoia was eating me alive. I started looking into ways to track the calls. I found an app on my phone that allowed me to trace numbers, and finally, after weeks of terror, I got a break. The number came from a payphone not too far from my apartment. The calls were being made from a public location, a place where I could possibly track down the person responsible. I still don't know who it was. They never called again after that. But I found out later that a woman who lived 2 blocks away from me had been receiving similar calls. She reported the same breathing, the same threats. The police didn't find anyone, but I don't sleep the same way anymore. I keep my blinds closed all the time now, even during the day. I double-check the locks on my windows before I go to bed. And I never answer the phone if I don't recognize the number. I don't know who was behind those calls. I don't know if I'll ever find out. But I do know one thing for sure. I'm not going to let my guard down again. Ever. It was around 2 a.m. when my boyfriend and I pulled into a 24-hour gas station, the kind that's lit up like a Christmas tree even though it's the middle of the night. We had been driving for hours and needed to stretch our legs, grab some snacks, and fill up the car before we continued on our way. It was a pretty routine stop, nothing out of the ordinary, at least at first. The station was quiet, as expected for that time of night. There were a few cars scattered across the lot, and a couple of people inside the small convenience store. I didn't pay much attention to anyone, just focused on getting the gas, then heading back on the road. My boyfriend got out to fill the car while I stayed inside, scrolling through my phone and trying to stay awake. I noticed a man at the pump next to ours. He was standing by his car, but he wasn't pumping gas. He was just standing there. I didn't think much of it at first. I assumed maybe he was just waiting for the gas to finish, but the whole thing felt odd. It wasn't normal for someone to just stand there like that, staring off into space, especially at that hour. His car was a dark sedan, nothing unusual about it, but something about the way he was standing there didn't sit right with me. After a few minutes, I saw my boyfriend walking back toward the car with a soda in hand. I started the car, ready to leave. But just as we were about to pull out, I noticed the man had gotten into his car. He wasn't moving at first, just sitting there, looking at us through the rearview mirror. It was the kind of stare that made me feel uneasy, like he was watching us on purpose. I told my boyfriend, that guy's been just standing by his car for a while. He's still staring at us. My boyfriend glanced over, then shook his head. Probably just some weirdo. Let's go. We started pulling out of the gas station, and I didn't think much more about it. But then, just as we were about to turn onto the main road, I saw the man's headlights in the rearview mirror. He was behind us now, tailing us down the street. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he was just headed the same way. But as we drove, I kept looking back, and I saw him keeping the same distance, never getting closer but never falling behind either. That guy's following us, I said, my voice low, but I could tell my boyfriend was starting to feel it too. His grip on the steering wheel tightened, and I saw him glance over at me, his brow furrowed in concern. He's probably just going the same way. Don't overthink it, he said, but I could tell he wasn't completely convinced either. I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I kept watching the man's headlights in the rearview mirror. Every time I glanced back, I could see his car, right behind us, following at the exact same distance. We took a few turns, trying to lose him, but each time we turned, his headlights turned with us. He wasn't speeding up or slowing down, just keeping pace like he knew exactly where we were going. We tried to shake him off by taking some random streets, but the more we turned, the more we realized he was still right behind us. It was becoming clear that this wasn't just a coincidence. The man was following us, and I couldn't understand why. It was the middle of the night, and we were out on a quiet stretch of road. There was nothing here but empty houses and trees. We were alone. My boyfriend looked at me again. "Okay, this is getting weird. We need to call the cops." I nodded, heart racing in my chest. He reached for his phone, but as soon as he did, the man's headlights blinked, and then he turned off his headlights completely. I couldn't see anything in the rearview mirror. It was like he had just disappeared. My stomach dropped. "Where did he go?" I asked, almost whispering, but my boyfriend was already looking over his shoulder, trying to figure it out. He slowed the car down, trying to keep an eye on the road behind us. And then, from out of nowhere, the man's headlights appeared again, much closer now, right behind us, as if he had been waiting for us to slow down. He wasn't being subtle anymore. He was right on our tail, and I could hear the hum of his engine as he sped up to match our speed. My boyfriend slammed on the gas, speeding up, trying to put some distance between us and the man. We sped through the dark streets, weaving between turns, but no matter what we did, the man kept following, never losing us for a second. It was like he had all the time in the world and nothing else to do except stay with us. "Call the cops now," I said, my voice panicked. "Please. I'm scared." My boyfriend immediately pulled over to the side of the road, his hands shaking as he dialed the police. While he was on the phone, I couldn't stop watching the rearview mirror. The man's car was still behind us, and it felt like he was just waiting for the right moment to do something. I don't know what, but the thought of it was terrifying. The police told my boyfriend to stay calm and that they were on their way, but it felt like an eternity before they showed up. During those minutes, we sat there in the car, frozen, waiting for something to happen. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, the man's headlights were still there. Not too close, but close enough to make me sick to my stomach. Finally, after what seemed like hours, a police car appeared, its lights flashing in the distance. The man's car immediately took off, swerving around us and speeding away down the street. The officer who had arrived started chasing him, and my boyfriend and I both breathed a sigh of relief. The police managed to catch up with the man about 15 minutes later, and when they pulled him over, they found out he had been following multiple cars that night, targeting people who were alone or in vulnerable situations. It turned out he had been doing this for weeks, creeping behind people at night, never speeding up, never falling too far behind, just watching. And when the cops found him, he was carrying a knife in the glove compartment. The whole thing was surreal. The fact that he had been following us so closely, the way he just sat there at the gas station pretending to pump gas, watching us without saying a word, it all made my skin crawl. It's not something I ever want to experience again. I don't know what would have happened if we hadn't called the cops or if we hadn't been so paranoid. I don't want to think about it. All I know is that it could have ended very differently. I'm just grateful that we got out of it safely. Every time I stop at a gas station now, I can't help but glance around, just in case. The feeling of being watched never quite goes away. I still can't shake the feeling of unease from that night. I've tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I know something was off. I wasn't planning on posting this, but the more I think about it, the more I feel like I have to get it out there. Maybe someone will understand what happened, or maybe I'm just looking for some sort of reassurance that I wasn't losing my mind. It was a work trip, the kind where you stay at a hotel in a city you've never been to before, stuck in a room that feels like every other generic hotel room you've stayed in. I got to the place late at night. The front desk was quiet, with just one employee who barely looked up when I checked in. The hallway to my room was quiet too, and everything about the place felt normal, too normal. I'd stayed at worse hotels before, and honestly, the place wasn't bad at all. The carpets were clean, the lights worked, and the room itself had a pretty decent view of the street below. It was after I'd settled in that I started to notice something odd. The room itself was fine, but there was this weird feeling in the hallway outside. It wasn't anything obvious at first, but the longer I was there, the more it started to bug me. It wasn't until later that night when I was heading to get some ice that I saw something that made me feel uneasy. I'd walked down the hallway and past a door that, for some reason, I hadn't really paid attention to before. It wasn't on the floor plan, at least not on the map by the elevator that had all the room numbers listed. The door was solid, no sign of a room number, just a plain brown wood that matched the rest of the hallway's decor. What made me stop, though, was the sound. I thought I heard something on the other side. At first, I thought it was just the building settling or maybe some sort of air vent, but then I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. It was a whisper. Just barely audible, like it was coming from far away, but clear enough that I couldn't ignore it. My name. Ryan. The whisper was soft, almost gentle. I froze in place, staring at the door, trying to process what I just heard. I didn't know anyone in the area, and there was no one I could think of who would know I was staying there. I shook it off, at first telling myself it was just the wind, or maybe even the hotel's own plumbing. After all, old buildings make strange noises, right? But then, it came again. Ryan. I swear my heart skipped a beat. The voice sounded so real, and it was coming from behind the door. I took a step back, confused and a little unnerved. Who could be behind that door? The building was supposed to have been recently renovated, and this hallway had no rooms on it. At least, none that were marked on the map. The elevator, the stairs, and the fire escape plan were all clear about the room numbers, but there was no mention of anything behind that door. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was on the other side. Maybe it was just a maintenance room or storage, but something didn't sit right. My curiosity got the better of me, though, and I walked closer to the door. I put my ear to it, hoping to hear something else, but the hallway was silent. No more whispers. No more sounds. Just the hum of the air conditioning in the background. I almost walked away, but something made me stop. Something told me I should try the handle. I don't know why. Maybe it was the curiosity or the need to confirm that I wasn't just hearing things. I grabbed the knob, and to my surprise, it turned. The door creaked open a little, just enough for me to see a sliver of darkness inside. I couldn't make out anything beyond the crack, but I could feel the air shift. It was cooler in there, and the smell hit me immediately, stale, musty air. And then, as I stood there, staring into the darkness, I heard it again. The voice, soft and faint but unmistakable. Ryan. It was closer now. I jerked back, nearly knocking into the wall behind me. My pulse was racing. I don't know why I didn't just leave right then, but for some reason, I found myself standing there, staring at the crack in the door. I don't know how long I stood there, but it felt like an eternity. My mind was racing. Was someone trapped behind the door? Was there a room back there I didn't know about? Was it some sort of prank or a setup? I looked around the hallway again, but there was no one in sight. Just the stillness of the empty corridor. And that damn door. Finally, I stepped away, and in a panic, I went to find anyone to explain what had just happened. I went down to the front desk, but there was no one there. The lobby was empty. I pressed the bell, but nothing happened. I felt a little foolish standing there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I went back to my room, trying to calm down. But as I lay there in bed, the unease from earlier wouldn't leave me. Every little noise in the hotel seemed amplified. The buzzing of the lights, the creaking of the floorboards, the distant sound of traffic outside, it all felt wrong. I kept thinking about that door and the voice behind it. The next morning, I went back to the hallway, determined to figure out what had happened. The door was still there, but it was locked. The handle was cold, and there was no sign of anyone else around. I checked the floor plan again, looking for any clues. But once again, there was no mention of that door. There wasn't even a storage room listed. I took a quick look around, making sure no one was nearby, and then I pulled out my phone to snap a picture of the door, just to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining it. As soon as I did, I heard a voice. Not from behind the door, but from somewhere else, closer this time. Brian. I turned around, my stomach dropping, but there was no one there. I snapped the picture and left the hallway as fast as I could. I haven't been back to that hotel since. I can't explain what happened, but I know it wasn't just my mind playing tricks. That voice, whoever it was, knew my name, and it came from behind that door, a door that wasn't supposed to exist. I haven't stayed in any hotel like that since. And every time I go somewhere new, I always make sure to check the fire escape plan, just to see if there's a door I don't recognize. I've been a bus driver for about 6 years now, and to be honest, most days blur together. There's not much excitement. Just the same routes, the same passengers, the same stops. Most people don't really stand out unless they're regulars, which, in my case, is a lot of them. It's a small town, so you get used to seeing the same faces. But there was one guy, one passenger, that started to get under my skin in a way I couldn't explain. It started out pretty harmless. I first noticed him about 3 months ago. He wasn't anything special at first glance. Maybe in his late 30s, average height, always wearing the same gray jacket and dark jeans. He didn't look out of place, just another face in the crowd. The first time he boarded, I didn't think much of it. He was quiet, as most people are when they ride public transportation. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't ask any questions, just sat in the back and stared out the window. Nothing weird, nothing out of the ordinary. But then he came back the next day. And the next. Same time, same stop. I thought, okay, maybe he just has a regular schedule like I do. It's not unusual for people to get on the same bus every day. But what started to get to me was that he never got off. He'd board at the same stop, sit in the same seat, and just stay. At first, I thought maybe he was just quiet. Some people like to zone out or nap, I get it. But it started to feel like he was watching me. I tried not to let it bother me, but after a few days, it became hard to ignore. Every time I glanced into the rearview mirror, his eyes would be locked on me. He wouldn't be looking out the window or at the people around him, just staring right at me. I can't really describe why it felt off, but it did. Like I was being observed in a way that made me uncomfortable. I figured, maybe he's just shy. Maybe he's one of those guys who doesn't know how to engage with others, so he just looks at the driver. But then things started to change. He started boarding at different times. Not just the usual 8 a.m. or 6 p.m. anymore. Some days it was in the middle of the afternoon, others late at night. It didn't matter what time I drove, he'd be there, getting on the bus, sitting in the same seat in the back, staring. It wasn't just the times that shifted. The places he boarded also changed. One day he'd be at the usual stop, but the next, he'd get on a few blocks away, at a completely different stop. It started to feel less like coincidence and more like he was intentionally following the bus, knowing exactly where I would be at any given time. I know that sounds paranoid, but there was something about the way he did it. He didn't rush to get on. He didn't seem to care how long it took. He'd wait, as if he knew when I'd arrive. I didn't tell anyone at first. I didn't want to sound crazy,